Hello everyone, my name's Ellie. I must start by giving you a trigger warning because my story does involve some abuse. I won't go into a lot of detail, but I will mention some instances to show you what my mother-in-law put me through. I still regret the day I married Jake, my now ex-husband. Initially, I thought Jake was a good man from a respected family. His mother, Chrissy, worked at a charitable foundation, and his father, Xavier, was a successful businessman. They seemed like a great family, and I was happy to be a part of it. However, everything changed after I married Jake. Chrissy, my mother-in-law, became increasingly abusive towards me. It started with small things like hiding my belongings, glasses, phone, and purse, and laughing as I searched anxiously for them. She would also ask me to handle hot pots that would burn me, and once she even mixed shrimp juice into a dish knowing I was allergic, causing me to miss an important event. She would make me cook for hours only to throw everything on the floor. Whenever confronted, she denied any wrongdoing or claimed it was accidental. After enduring months of this mistreatment, I finally confronted Chrissy and sought help from Jake. "You need to tell me what your problem is, Chrissy," I pleaded. "I'm tired of your behavior. I know you've been intentionally trying to hurt and embarrass me." Chrissy responded defensively, "What are you talking about, Ellie? How could you accuse me of something like that? Are you jealous of me or something?" Frustrated, I retorted, "Why would I be jealous of you? You're a psycho who enjoys hurting me for no reason." Jake, instead of supporting me, brushed off my concerns. "Ellie, don't be so dramatic. My mother is a respected lady. She works at a charitable foundation. She would never do anything to hurt you." Feeling betrayed by Jake's indifference to my suffering, I realized Chrissy had manipulated him too, hiding her actions and pretending innocence. It was shocking that he blamed me for accusing his mother despite knowing about her deliberate actions against me. I was horrified to hear what he said. "Jake, you need to do something about your mom. What she's been doing to me is borderline abusive. You've seen how she intentionally makes food with ingredients I'm allergic to, and she doesn't even tell me." "You're being ridiculous, Ellie," Jake replied firmly. "Mom would never do something like that. It's all in your head. She's been telling me you're jealous of her. I can see what's happening." "What the hell, Jake? You know your mother has been tampering with my food, adding allergens to it. You know more than that," I exclaimed, feeling bewildered by his defense of her. "Yet you're taking her side?" I couldn't comprehend why Jake, who had always loved and cared for me, was now dismissing my concerns about his mother. It felt like a sudden betrayal. I stared at him in disbelief, trying to make sense of his change in attitude. That's when his mother interjected. "Jake, your wife is crossing all limits," she declared coldly. "If she continues this behavior, we may have to kick her out. I always knew she was unworthy of our family, and now she's proving it. If you want to support your wife, you can leave as well. That will help us decide better what to do with your inheritance." "And Mom, Ellie is just upset right now. I don't support her at all," Jake quickly responded, trying to appease his mother. "I promise she'll behave herself. If not, you can kick her out. I won't mind. I always knew you were the reasonable one, Mom. Thank God you can see past this." I was stunned. Jake was blatantly choosing his mother's side, denying my experiences and blaming me for the tension. It became clear to me why he was acting this way. You see, Jake and I were living with his parents because that's what they wanted. He worked for his father's company and was financially dependent on his dad. He hoped to inherit his father's assets, and upsetting his mother could jeopardize that. It was evident that my husband was more concerned about securing his future inheritance than protecting me. "What the hell is wrong with you, Ellie? Are you trying to get us kicked out or something?" Jake snapped at me later when we were alone. "Seriously, Jake, that's all you have to say after I told you about your mom's abuse? What kind of husband are you?" I cried out in frustration. "The kind that knows how to secure his future," Jake replied coldly. "You're insane, Ellie. You can't just expect me to accuse my mom of such things and drag me into your problems. If she gets mad at me, do you think she'll let Dad give me my inheritance?" "Is your inheritance more important than your wife, Jake?" I asked, tears welling up in my eyes. "We don't need anything. Let's leave and buy our own house. It may be smaller, but it will be ours, and no one can abuse me there," I pleaded. "Don't be ridiculous, Ellie. We could never afford a house like this." "I'm not going anywhere. You'll put up with my mom and stop complaining," Jake asserted firmly. "If you don't, I'm sure my mom will kick you out. Don't come crying to me because I won't help you." And at that moment, I realized the truth. When I realized my marriage was over, Jake betrayed me in the worst possible way. He wasn't the man I thought he was. Feeling helpless, I watched as Chrissy escalated her abusive tactics, now assured Jake wouldn't intervene. I felt lost, wanting to flee and leave it all behind. But I refused to let Chrissy get away with her cruelty, and devised a plan to expose her. Accessing the house's security footage covertly, I compiled undeniable evidence of Chrissy's abuse against me into a video. I bided my time, waiting for Chrissy's upcoming birthday celebration, where Xavier and guests would be present. That day became my deadline, my moment to confront her. On Chrissy's birthday, she played the gracious hostess, behaving impeccably, likely because of the guests. I played along, biding my time until after the cake was cut. Stating before everyone, I made a calm announcement. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate my dear mother-in-law, Chrissy," I began. "I'm sure many of you know what a sweet and caring woman she appears to be. Today, on her birthday, I thought it fitting to share a glimpse of the real Chrissy." Without further ado, I directed everyone's attention to a screen where I had prepared a video compilation. "Please enjoy this video I've put together to honor our dear birthday girl," I said as I played the footage. Prepared for any backlash, I had friends on standby, ready to support me if needed. After enduring years of Chrissy's abuse, I had reached my breaking point. I no longer cared about her or Jake. I was done. As the video played, the room fell silent. Guests watched in horror and disbelief as the truth about Chrissy unfolded before their eyes. Chrissy and Jake stood in stunned silence, while Xavier's expression betrayed deep reflection. In that moment, I knew I had taken a stand against my monstrous mother-in-law, exposing her deceit to everyone present. I didn't blame Jake. He had been away for days and unaware of what had been happening. When the video ended, it was my father-in-law, Xavier, who broke the silence. "What the hell did I just watch, Chrissy?" he demanded. "It's not what it looks like, Xavier. These videos are fabricated, taken out of context," Chrissy hurriedly replied. Xavier's voice remained firm. "Oh really, Chrissy? They don't look fabricated to me. Are you suggesting my daughter-in-law went to the lengths of doctoring videos just to humiliate you?" "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, Xavier," Chrissy insisted. "Ellie is doing this out of malice. I don't know how she managed to manipulate those videos. I would never do something like this." Chrissy's casual lies infuriated me. She was attempting to convince everyone that a year of abuse documented in my video was entirely fabricated. I couldn't believe she might still deceive people after exposing her antics. I calmly responded, "So now you want to blame me for tarnishing your image, Chrissy? Let's settle this then. Let's call the police and let them decide if these videos are fabricated." "Nonsense, Ellie. The police won't entertain baseless accusations from a liar like you," Chrissy retorted confidently. "Are you sure about that, Chrissy?" I challenged. "You were just claiming ignorance of your illegal actions. Let's call the cops and find out." Chrissy looked panicked at the prospect. She hadn't anticipated being confronted like this. Meanwhile, I noticed some of Chrissy's friends, colleagues from the charitable foundation where she worked, giving her disapproving looks while typing on their phones. They seemed to be reporting what they witnessed at the party. Chrissy continued to plead her innocence to Xavier. "Xavier, do you hear her? She's threatening to involve the police. Ellie is trying to get me into trouble. She's delusional." Xavier's expression hardened. "Jake, care to explain what you were doing while your wife was being abused under my roof?" "Dad, it's not as bad as it looks," Jake interjected nervously. "Mom is a caring mother-in-law." "Seriously, Jake? Is this how a caring mother-in-law behaves?" Xavier challenged. "Are you out of your mind? Ellie showed you proof, and you still defend your mother." Realizing the gravity of the situation, Xavier addressed everyone present. "Wait a minute. Ellie told Jake about the abuse, and he did nothing." The room fell silent as the realization sank in. No one had expected Jake to know the truth and fail to protect his wife. It became evident that Jake's priorities were tied more to his inheritance and living in a luxurious mansion than standing up for his wife. Zaire, a man of morals and ethics, was visibly furious at his son's betrayal. "I didn't marry Jake for his father's fortune or to live in a grand mansion. I married him out of love," I declared, my voice steady with resolve. "But it's clear that Jake has different priorities." Xavier stepped forward, his expression reflecting disappointment and anger. It was clear he wouldn't tolerate Chrissy's behavior any longer. When I told Xavier that I had informed Jake about the abuse, he refused to believe me. Jake had always dismissed my concerns, accusing me of overreacting and defending Chrissy. He insisted he couldn't risk upsetting her because it might jeopardize our stay in the house. "Why didn't you come to me sooner, Ellie?" Xavier asked, his voice heavy with regret. "I needed to gather proof," I explained. "I knew no one would believe me without it." "We all believe you, Ellie. I'm so sorry this happened to you," Xavier sighed. "I'm sorry I failed to raise my son right. As for Chrissy, you can call the cops on her. I won't interfere." "How could you say that, Xavier? You would let her call the cops on her own wife." Chrissy protested. "My life will be ruined?" "Xavier, our reputation will be ruined," Jake added urgently. "You can't support this." "Shut your mouths," Xavier's voice thundered. "After what you've done, you have no right to tell me how to act. And don't call me family. Abusers and enablers can never be my family. As for my reputation, it will remain intact. I will divorce Chrissy and disinherit Jake as soon as possible. I want no ties with monsters like you too." Chrissy and Jake were stunned by Xavier's decisive words. They had assumed they could spin the situation to make me look like the villain, but the crowd's cheers made it clear that no one believed them. Chrissy's friends had already left, pledging their support to me and promising to hold Chrissy accountable in their own way. As Chrissy and Jake pleaded with Xavier, insisting he reconsider, he remained resolute. "Ellie's words are backed by proof. She didn't just tell me the truth, she showed it to me. Unlike my spineless son here, I intend to do what's right by Ellie." "Dad, I'm sorry," Jake finally admitted. "I should have listened to Ellie. Believe me, Dad, I had no idea Mom was capable of." "I showed you proof once, Jake," I interrupted, my voice steady with resolve. "But you chose to do nothing. You didn't want to risk your inheritance." Xavier's decision was final, and Chrissy and Jake realized they couldn't change his mind. Their attempts to manipulate the situation had failed, and now they faced the consequences of their actions. "I don't even know what I ever saw in you. It's ironic that your father cares more about me than you," I remarked bitterly. "If you hadn't supported me today, Xavier, I don't know what I would have done," I continued, feeling grateful for Xavier's backing. "I support you wholeheartedly, Ellie. My foolish son doesn't deserve you, and he certainly doesn't deserve the inheritance he covets so badly," Xavier asserted firmly. "It's only right that I disinherit him." "Dad, no. You can't do this to me," Jake pleaded desperately. "I'm your son." "Don't call me Dad, Jake. I'm done being an ATM to two useless people who contribute nothing but misery to this world," Xavier retorted. "Since you become as greedy and deceitful as your mother, you can leave with her after our divorce. There will be no home for you here anymore." "You're not serious about this, Xavier," Chrissy interjected, her voice trembling. "You're just saying this to hurt me. We've been together for almost 3 decades. "Yes, we have been together that long," Xavier acknowledged coldly. "But I never imagined my own wife could be so vile and monstrous. After today, I want nothing to do with you." Chrissy stood frozen, stunned into silence, while Jake sobbed and begged Xavier for forgiveness. It struck me profoundly how today's events laid bare their true priorities. They cared only for wealth and reputation, not for the person they had abused for a year. I felt disgusted by the man I once called my husband. He was more upset about losing his inheritance than realizing the extent of my suffering. Chrissy began crying and pleading with Xavier, not to me, but to him. "Xavier, please, I know I made a mistake. It won't happen again. Please don't take such a drastic step without thinking." "Dad, Mom is right. We messed up, but we'll make it right," Jake added, his voice choked with tears. "We're ashamed of ourselves. This will be a wake-up call for me. Please forgive us." "You have some nerve asking for forgiveness," Xavier responded bitterly. "You haven't even apologized to Ellie, the main victim here. You're apologizing to me because I have the power to leave you bankrupt and homeless. Not once have you shown remorse or apologized to her for your despicable actions." Xavier's words echoed my own feelings of betrayal and neglect. He saw through their insincerity, recognizing their desperation to avoid losing everything they had. As soon as Xavier pointed out their hypocrisy, Chrissy and Jake began bombarding me with apologies. Their gestures felt so fake and desperate that I recoiled, feeling as though their mere touch would pollute me further. I wanted those monsters nowhere near me anymore. "Don't bother with your fake apologies anymore. I know you're only sorry because you got caught and are facing consequences," I stated firmly. "I'm not the doormat who entered this family a year ago. I see through your facades." Ellie, please, Chrissy pleaded, her voice quivering. I should have protected you. I'm so sorry I didn't. We love each other. We can move past this. We're family. Yes, we're family, I responded with bitter irony. I'm sorry, Chrissy, but I can't accept your apology. Your idea of a perfect family involves abusing your daughter-in-law. That's not something I'm willing to overlook. I was such a bad mother-in-law, Chrissy continued, attempting to salvage the situation. I promise I'll get help. I'll change. Please forgive us. Let's go back to being a family. I couldn't help but laugh. You must be delusional if you think I consider you family. You're nothing but leeches. Your apologies mean nothing. You're only here because your future is at stake. Well, I don't forgive you. Don't do this, Ellie, Jake pleaded desperately. I did what I did to protect us. I love you. You let your mom torture me because you wanted to secure our future. I shot back, my voice steady with resolve. I told you countless times we don't need your parents' money. I wanted us to leave, to get away from your evil mother, but greed kept you here, overlooking everything she did. I'm divorcing you, Jake, I declared firmly. That's final, and I'll be going after half of your assets. You'll pay for enabling your mother. Jake and Chrissy were stunned into silence, their pleading and apologies falling on deaf ears. They continued crying, but I was done listening. I called my friends, who swiftly gathered my belongings and drove me away from that toxic household. Jake tried to intervene, but one stern word from Xavier shut him down. Chrissy's pleas were equally ignored. I didn't need to involve the police with the video evidence. Xavier's actions spoke volumes. He kicked them out of the house, leaving them to beg at my friend's doorstep for shelter. Xavier had an ironclad prenup, ensuring Chrissy received nothing. Her friends at the charitable foundation exposed her actions, resulting in her dismissal. Jake lost his job at his father's company, along with any hope of a substantial inheritance. Chrissy had the audacity to appeal to me for help, claiming we were family. I promptly kicked them out and threatened a restraining order if they ever contacted me again. In the months that followed, I settled into my own place, having rented a small flat. The divorce was finalized smoothly, with Jake relinquishing assets he had once believed secure. He worked two jobs now, supporting a mother who refused to work. Once, Jake called me to complain about his circumstances, hinting he wanted to come back. I laughed and hung up, relishing the irony that he now faced the consequences of his actions. It was a long road to vengeance, but I no longer needed to actively pursue it. I was living well, and so was Xavier. As for Jake and Chrissy, they were reaping what they had sown, a heavy dose of karma for their years of abuse and manipulation.
My name is Amanda, and this is the story of how I survived growing up with a sister who could have given Machiavelli a run for his money. I was born in a small town to ordinary working-class parents. Mom was a receptionist at a local dentist's office, and Dad worked as a mechanic. They were good people, hardworking and honest, but perhaps a bit too trusting for their own good. When I came into the world, it was a difficult birth. The doctors told my mom she wouldn't be able to have any more children. So, for 5 years, I was their miracle baby, their only child. Those first 5 years were nice, normal. I have vague memories of picnics in the park, of Dad teaching me to ride a bike, of Mom reading me bedtime stories. But it all changed when I was 5, and my parents got the shock of their lives. Mom was pregnant again. I remember the day they told me I was going to be a big sister. They were practically glowing with excitement, and I caught their enthusiasm. I imagined having a little sister to play with, to share secrets with, to be best friends with. God, I was so naive. Sarah was born when I was 5.5. From the moment she came home from the hospital, it was like a switch had been flipped. Suddenly, I wasn't the miracle child anymore. Amanda, be quiet. Your sister's sleeping. Amanda, don't touch that. It's for your sister. Amanda, why can't you be more like your sister? It started small, you know? Little things that I brushed off as normal sibling stuff. But as Sarah grew, so did her talents. I remember her 7th birthday. Mom had spent hours on this beautiful cake, covered in delicate sugar roses. It was a work of art. The guests had just arrived when we heard Mom's horrified gasp from the kitchen. The cake was ruined, the roses all but destroyed. And there was Sarah, pointing at me with an accusing finger. "Amanda did it," she said, her voice trembling in a way that adults find impossible to disbelieve. "I saw her." I stood there, stunned, as Sarah produced my favorite t-shirt, now smeared with cake and frosting. I don't know how she got it, how she planned it all. She was 7, but she had the cunning of someone much older. I spent the rest of the party locked in my bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and celebration downstairs. As the sun set and the house quieted, I heard my door creak open. Sarah stood there, a slice of cake in her hand and a smile on her face that sent chills down my spine. "Want some cake, big sister?" she whispered, her eyes glittering in the dim light. "I saved you a piece. With a rose and everything." I stared at her, this young demon in a party dress, and felt the first stirrings of real fear. What kind of 7-year-old could pull off something like this? And more importantly, what else was she capable of? As the years rolled by, Sarah's manipulation tactics only grew more sophisticated. Every day became a new battle, and I was constantly on edge, wondering what she'd do next. When I was 14 and Sarah was 9, I started to notice my school supplies going missing or getting damaged. At first, I thought I was just being careless, misplacing things here and there. But then I started finding my notebooks with pages torn out, pencils broken in half, and textbooks with scribbles all over the important parts. One day, I caught Sarah red-handed, a pair of scissors in her hand and my history essay in shreds on her bedroom floor. "What are you doing?" I yelled, snatching the remains of my homework from her. Sarah's eyes welled up with crocodile tears. I was just trying to help you cut out some pictures for your project," she sniffled. "This isn't a project, it's my essay. It's due tomorrow." But it was too late. Mom had heard the commotion and came running. "What's going on here?" Before I could explain, Sarah burst into full-blown sobs. "I was just trying to help Amanda with her homework, but she yelled at me." Mom turned to me, her face a mask of disappointment. "Amanda, how could you? Your sister was only trying to help. Apologize to your sister right now." I stood there, seething with anger and frustration. Sarah peeked at me from behind Mom's legs, a sly smile playing on her lips. "I'm sorry," I gritted out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That night, I had to stay up until 3 a.m. rewriting my essay. The next day at school, I could barely keep my eyes open. My teacher wasn't impressed with my sloppy handwriting and obvious fatigue. "Amanda, this isn't like you," she said, frowning at my paper. "Please put more effort into your schoolwork. I'd hate to have to call your parents." But of course, she did end up calling my parents. And of course, they blamed me for not being responsible enough, for not taking my studies seriously. Sarah sat at the dinner table, quietly eating her food with a satisfied smirk, as Mom and Dad lectured me about the importance of education. As I grew older, Sarah's tactics evolved. When I started showing interest in boys in high school, she found new ways to torment me. My first boyfriend, Jake, broke up with me after hearing a rumor that I'd been cheating on him with his best friend. I was devastated, but when I confronted Sarah about it, she just shrugged. "How could I have started that rumor?" she said innocently. "I don't even know your friends from school." But I saw the glint in her eye, the barely concealed satisfaction at my pain. She was getting better at covering her tracks, at maintaining her facade of innocence. As my high school years progressed, I became more determined than ever to secure my escape. I poured all my energy into a special project that I hoped would be my ticket to a prestigious college far away from Sarah's clutches. But I knew better than to let my guard down, even for a moment. My friend Melissa was the only person I truly trusted. We'd been close since elementary school, and she was well aware of Sarah's true nature. "I need you to keep something for me," I told her one afternoon as we sat in her room. I pulled out a thick folder from my backpack. "This is my project for the university grant competition. If I win, I get a full ride to Westfield College." "Wow, that's amazing," Melissa exclaimed, then her face fell slightly. "But, why are you giving it to me?" I took a deep breath. Because if Sarah finds out how important this is to me, she'll find a way to destroy it. I need you to keep it safe. I'll work on a dummy version at home. Melissa's eyes widened in understanding. Clever, she said, taking the folder and locking it in her desk drawer. Don't worry, I'll guard it with my life. For weeks, I worked on 2 versions of the project, the real one, safely tucked away at Melissa's house, and a decoy version at home. I made sure to leave the decoy version conspicuously on my desk, knowing Sarah wouldn't be able to resist snooping. The day before the submission deadline, it happened. I was in the kitchen when I heard Sarah's sickeningly sweet voice. Oh no, Amanda, I'm so sorry. I rushed to the living room to find Sarah standing over my desk, a glass of orange juice appended over my decoy project. Papers were soaked, ink running in streaks across the pages. I was just bringing you a drink, Sarah said, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I tripped. It was an accident, I swear. Our parents came running at the commotion. Mom gasped at the sight of the ruined papers. Oh, Amanda, she sighed. You should be more careful about where you leave important things. I saw the glint of triumph in Sarah's eyes, the slight upturn of her lips as she waited for my reaction. But this time I was ready. I smiled. The look of confusion on Sarah's face was almost comical. It's okay, I said calmly. That was just a backup copy. I already submitted the real project last week. The triumph in Sarah's eyes flickered and died, replaced by a flash of anger so quick I almost missed it. Our parents, oblivious as always, praised me for my foresight. A few weeks later, the results of the competition were announced. I'd won the grant, a full scholarship to Westfield College, 3 states away. As I read the acceptance letter, tears of joy and relief streamed down my face. I was getting out. I was finally escaping. But my moment of triumph was short-lived. As I packed my bags for college, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones. It's a shame, Mom was saying. I wish Sarah had gotten an opportunity like this. She deserves it more. I know, Dad agreed. Amanda's smart, but Sarah, she's special. She could really go places with a chance like that. Their words stung, but I was past caring. In a few days, I'd be gone, starting a new life far away from Sarah's manipulations and my parents' blind favoritism. The next few years were like a breath of fresh air. At Westfield College, I thrived. I made genuine friends, excelled in my studies, and even started to heal from the emotional trauma of my childhood. I majored in finance, discovering a talent for numbers and analysis that I never knew I had. Whatever the reason, I graduated at the top of my class and landed a job at a prestigious financial firm in the city. Life was good. I had my own apartment, a job I loved, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. I kept in touch with my parents, visiting them on holidays and occasional weekends, but these visits were always tense. Sarah was still living at home, having chosen to attend a local community college. Every time I saw her, I could feel her resentment simmering just beneath the surface. It was a typical Friday at work when I got the call that would shatter my carefully constructed peace. I was in the middle of analyzing some market trends when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Amanda, she said, her voice tight with tension. We need to talk. It's about your sister. She's graduating soon, and, well, we think it would be best if she came to live with you in the city. I nearly dropped the phone. What? Mom, no. That's not possible. Don't be selfish, Amanda, my mother snapped. Sarah needs this opportunity. And you have that big apartment all to yourself. Plus, we need you to cover her tuition for college. I felt like I was drowning. All the old feelings of helplessness and fear came rushing back. Mom, I can't. My apartment isn't big enough, and I can't afford. Can't afford it? My mother interrupted. With that fancy job of yours? Don't lie to us, Amanda. We know you're doing well for yourself. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Mom, it's not about the money. Sarah and we don't get along. You know that. Oh, not this again, my mother sighed. Amanda, when are you going to let go of this childish jealousy? Your sister needs you. This is what family does. I closed my eyes, feeling a headache coming on. I'm sorry, Mom. The answer is no. I can't have Sarah living with me, and I won't pay for her tuition. I have my own life, my own expenses. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When my mother spoke again, her voice was cold. I see. Well, I hope you're happy with your decision, Amanda. Don't bother coming home for Christmas this year. Later that evening, as I was trying to distract myself with work, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Sarah. You'll regret this, it read. Just 3 words, but they sent a chill down my spine. I tried to shake it off. Sarah was hundreds of miles away. What could she possibly do to me now? Months flew by after that tense phone call with my parents. I threw myself into my work, trying to push thoughts of my family to the back of my mind. My life in the city continued. I excelled at my job, made new friends, and even started dating a bit. Then, on a random Tuesday, my phone rang. It was my mother. Amanda, she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. We need you to come home. It's important. Against my better judgment, I took a month's vacation from work and boarded a plane back to my hometown. As I walked up the familiar driveway, a sense of dread washed over me. What could be so important that they needed me home for a whole month? We gathered in the living room, an uneasy silence falling over us. Finally, my mother spoke. Your great-aunt Mildred called us, she said. She wants all 4 of us to visit her in Hawaii. She's even booked the plane tickets herself. I blinked in surprise. Aunt Mildred had always been kind to me as a child, but I hadn't seen her in years. All 4 of us? I asked, glancing at Sarah. Sarah snorted. It's ridiculous. Amanda doesn't need to go. She hasn't even talked to Aunt Mildred in years. Hush, my father said sternly. This was Mildred's condition. All 4 of us, or none of us. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. I could almost see the gears turning in everyone's heads. Finally, my mother voiced what we were all thinking. Do you think she might be dying? That this is about her will? The atmosphere in the room shifted. I saw a glimmer of something in Sarah's eyes. Greed? Excitement? It made me uneasy. We shouldn't jump to conclusions, I said quickly. Maybe she just wants to see all of us. But even as I said it, I knew it was unlikely. Aunt Mildred had always been a bit of a recluse. For her to suddenly want a family reunion in Hawaii, it had to be something big. As we discussed the logistics of the trip, I found myself getting excited despite my reservations. I had fond memories of Aunt Mildred from my childhood. She had always been kind to me, always had a moment to listen when no one else did. The thought of seeing her again, of spending time in beautiful Hawaii, was appealing. But there was still a nagging worry in the back of my mind. I glanced at Sarah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since her initial outburst. She caught my eye and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the same smile she'd given me countless times, before pulling some elaborate scheme to get me in trouble. I tried to shake off the feeling. We were adults now. Surely Sarah wouldn't try anything, not with so much potentially at stake. And yet, the day of our departure finally arrived. Despite my lingering unease, I found myself caught up in the excitement of the trip. We arrived at the airport, our family presenting a united front for what felt like the first time in years. As we approached the security checkpoint, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this trip could be a fresh start for all of us. How naive I was. Just as we were about to go through security, a stern-faced officer approached me. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Confused and a little scared, I looked at my family. What's going on? The officer's face remained impassive. We received an anonymous tip that you're carrying prohibited items in your luggage. We need to do a thorough check. My heart sank as I turned to look at Sarah. There it was, that familiar gleeful smile, the one that always spelled trouble for me. In that moment, I knew exactly what had happened. It was her, I said, pointing at Sarah. She sent that message. She's trying to sabotage me. My parents' faces clouded over with anger, but to my shock, it was directed at me. Amanda, my mother hissed. How dare you accuse your sister like that? Again with this nonsense? But, I tried to protest, but my father cut me off. Enough, Amanda. Go with the officer. We'll sort this out. Just then, an announcement echoed through the terminal, final boarding call for Flight 372 to Honolulu. My parents exchanged a look of panic. That's our flight, my mother said. Please, I begged, my voice cracking. Wait for me. I'll sort this out quickly, I promise. But my pleas fell on deaf ears. My father shook his head, not meeting my eyes. We can't miss this flight, Amanda. You know how important this is. We'll see you in Hawaii, my mother added, already turning away. I watched in disbelief as my parents walked away, not even glancing back. Only Sarah looked back, her triumphant smile cutting me to the core. Then she too disappeared into the crowd, leaving me alone with the security officer. The next few hours were a blur of invasive searches and endless questions. They went through every item in my luggage, every pocket of my clothing. I had to wait for a female officer to be available for a pat-down. By the time they finally concluded that I wasn't carrying anything illegal, my family's plane was long gone. As I sat in the now quiet airport, I faced a choice. I could book a flight for the next day, join my family in Hawaii, and try to salvage this disaster of a trip. Or I looked at the departure board. There was a flight leaving for my city in an hour. Back to my job, my friends, my life. Away from the drama and pain that seemed to follow my family wherever they went. In that moment, I made my decision. I walked up to the ticket counter and bought a one-way ticket home. As I boarded the plane, I felt a mixture of hurt, anger, and an odd sense of relief. Yes, I was letting Aunt Mildred down, and I felt guilty about that. But for once, I was choosing myself. My peace, my sanity. A few days after returning home, I was settling back into my routine, trying to push the airport incident out of my mind. I was just beginning to relax when my phone rang. It was my mother. Amanda, her voice trembled, thick with emotion. My heart raced, sensing something was terribly wrong. Your sister, Sarah's been arrested. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Arrested? What for? My mother's story came out in a rush of words, each one more shocking than the last. They had arrived at Aunt Mildred's house in Hawaii, only to find her furious that I wasn't there. She refused to discuss her will without all four of us present, Mom explained. We had to stay at her house while we tried to figure out what to do. I felt a pang of guilt, quickly overshadowed by my mother's next words. Then it happened. Your aunt, she almost fell down the stairs. She could have broken her neck, Amanda. What? Is she okay? I asked, concerned for the aunt I remembered so fondly. She's fine, thank goodness. But Amanda, it wasn't an accident. It was Sarah. She pushed her. I felt the blood drain from my face. How do you know? There were cameras. Hidden all over the house. They caught everything. The pieces started falling into place. The anonymous tip at the airport, Sarah's triumphant smile, it had all been part of her plan. A plan that had backfired spectacularly. Aunt Mildred called the police, my mother continued, her voice breaking. When they came to arrest Sarah, she lost it. Started screaming about how she just wanted the money, how she'd been waiting for years for this opportunity. I listened in stunned silence as my mother recounted Sarah's meltdown. How she'd screamed that she hated our parents, that she was just waiting for them to die so she could inherit everything. We were blind, Amanda, my mother sobbed. How could we not have seen it? How could we have been so wrong about her? As I listened to my mother's broken words, a whirlwind of emotions swept through me. Shock at Sarah's actions. Vindication that her true nature had finally been revealed. Sadness for my parents, whose world had just been shattered. And buried beneath it all, a tiny, shameful spark of satisfaction that they finally understood what I'd been trying to tell them for years. As we ended the call, I sat in silence, trying to wrap my head around everything that had happened. The sister I'd grown up with, who I'd always known was manipulative, had crossed a line I never thought possible. She'd tried to seriously harm our great-aunt, all for the chance at an inheritance. When I arrived at my childhood home, the atmosphere was completely different from my last visit. Gone was the tension and unspoken resentment. Instead, I found my parents looking older, more vulnerable, but also more open than I'd ever seen them. "Amanda," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion as she embraced me. "We're so sorry. We've been blind for so long." My father, a man never comfortable with emotional displays, simply placed a hand on my shoulder. "We should have listened to you," he said gruffly. "Can you forgive us?" It was a moment I'd dreamed of for years, but now that it was here, I found myself overwhelmed. "Of course," I managed to say, tears welling up in my eyes. "Of course I forgive you." We spent hours talking, really talking, for what felt like the first time in years. They shared their shock at Sarah's actions, their guilt over dismissing my concerns for so long, and their fear for the future. I listened, offering support and finally feeling heard. But our fragile peace was soon shattered. We received word that Aunt Mildred had withdrawn her statement to the police, and Sarah was being released. The news hit us like a physical blow. "She can't come back here," my father said, his voice firm. "We can't trust her anymore." What followed was a painful but necessary process. My parents, with my support, filed for Sarah's eviction. They presented the court with evidence of her threats in Hawaii, her actions towards Aunt Mildred, along with a history of manipulative behavior. The court ruled in our favor. Sarah was to be evicted from the family home. When she came, my parents didn't even let her in the house. They left her belongings on the porch, a final, symbolic separation. Sarah's response was predictably spiteful. As she drove away, presumably out of our lives for good, she left one last parting shot, a string of vicious curses spray-painted on the side of the house. It was childish, petty, and so typically Sarah that it almost made me laugh. Almost. Then, out of the blue, I received a call from Aunt Mildred. "Amanda, dear," she said, her voice warm, despite everything that had happened. "I think it's time you came to visit me in Hawaii. Just you this time." I was hesitant at first, but something in her voice convinced me. A week later, I found myself on a plane to Hawaii, unsure of what to expect. Aunt Mildred's house was beautiful, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. She greeted me with a warm hug, looking far more spry than I'd imagined given recent events. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, leading me into her study. "There's something I need to show you." She pulled out a document, her will. As I scanned the pages, my eyes widened in shock. Aunt Mildred had left everything, her house, her investments, everything, to me. "But, why?" I stammered, looking up at her in disbelief. Aunt Mildred smiled, a twinkle in her eye. "Because, my dear, you're the only one who never came here looking for a handout. You're the only one who saw me as family, not as a potential windfall." More than the inheritance itself, what touched me was the recognition. After years of being overlooked and dismissed, someone had seen my true worth. As I hugged Aunt Mildred, tears in my eyes, I felt like I was finally, truly coming home. My name is Erica, and this is the story of how my life turned upside down in ways I never could have imagined. For over a decade, I'd been happily married to my husband, James. We had what I thought was a rock-solid relationship built on trust and mutual respect. I worked as a remote French tutor, a job I enjoyed despite its modest pay. James came from a well-to-do family, but that never mattered to us. His parents, however, were a different story. Richard, my father-in-law, was an influential executive director at the local hospital. His wife, Margaret, busied herself with various charitable foundations. From the moment James introduced me, they made it clear they didn't approve of me. James had a brother, Michael, who was married to Emily. They had a 13-year-old daughter named Lily. Unable to have children of my own, I doted on my niece, often taking her for weekends and outings. Emily and I had become close over the years. During one of our coffee dates, she confided in me about the family's wealth. "Erica, you wouldn't believe the amount of property and money Richard and Margaret have given Michael and me," she whispered, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. "We're talking millions." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Millions? Where did they get that kind of money?" Emily shrugged. "I try not to think about it too much. But sometimes I joke that we're secret millionaires who can't touch our fortune." I laughed along, but a nagging feeling settled in my stomach. Something about the situation felt off, but I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on my family and my work. Life continued this way for years, a delicate balance of family dynamics and unspoken tensions. Then, tragedy struck. Michael and Emily were killed in a car accident, leaving Lily an orphan. The funeral was a somber affair, but something about Richard and Margaret's behavior struck me as odd. They seemed distracted, almost annoyed by the proceedings, as if they had more pressing matters on their minds than grieving their son. As we stood by the graveside, I overheard Margaret muttering to Richard, "We need to sort out the paperwork as soon as possible. This complicates everything." In the days that followed, I threw myself into caring for Lily. The poor girl was devastated, and I wanted to do everything I could to comfort her. After much discussion with James, I approached him with an idea. "Honey, what if we adopted Lily?" I suggested one evening. "She needs a stable home, and we love her so much already." James considered it for a moment before nodding. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Let's talk to my parents about it." The next day, James and I visited his parents' sprawling mansion to discuss our proposal to adopt Lily. As we sat in their opulent living room, I couldn't help but feel out of place among the antique furniture and priceless artworks. "Absolutely not," Margaret snapped as soon as we broached the subject. Her eyes narrowed as she glared at me. "Erica is not suitable to be a mother to our granddaughter. We will raise Lily ourselves." I was stunned by the vehemence in her voice. "But I've been a part of Lily's life since she was born," I protested. "James and I love her, and we can provide a stable home." Richard cleared his throat, his expression cold. "This isn't up for discussion. Lily stays with us." Margaret leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. "Besides, we all know what this is really about, don't we, Erica? You're just after Michael's money. How convenient that you can't have children of your own, and now you want to swoop in and become Lily's guardian. Did you think we wouldn't see through your little scheme?" As we left the house, I felt a mix of anger and sadness washing over me. "I can't believe they'd accuse me of something so horrible," I said to James as we drove home. He sighed, keeping his eyes on the road. "I'm sorry, Erica. They're just protective of Lily. Give them time, they'll come around." But time didn't improve things. In fact, over the next few weeks, I noticed a change in James. He began staying late at work more often, always with some vague excuse about an important project. When he was home, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and exchanging messages with someone. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table in silence, I couldn't take it anymore. "James, is everything okay? You've been so distant lately." He looked up from his phone, his expression hard. "It's nothing you need to concern yourself with," he snapped. I recoiled at his harsh tone. This wasn't like him at all. "I'm your wife," I said softly. "If something's bothering you, I want to help." "Just drop it, Erica," he growled, pushing away from the table and storming out of the room. Hurt and confused, I tried to focus on the one bright spot in my life, my relationship with Lily. I visited her at Richard and Margaret's house as often as I could, helping her with her French lessons and providing a sympathetic ear for her grief. One afternoon, as Lily and I sat in the sunroom working on her conjugations, I overheard Richard and Margaret arguing in the next room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself straining to hear their heated exchange. "We need to find a way to invalidate that trust fund," Richard hissed. $10 million, Margaret. 10 million that should be ours, not locked away for that girl. Margaret's voice was equally angry. "Don't you think I know that? I've got the lawyers working on it, but it's not going to be easy. Michael made sure everything was ironclad before he died." I felt my blood run cold. They were talking about Lily's inheritance, the money Michael and Emily had set aside for their daughter's future. And they wanted to take it for themselves. That evening, I rushed home, prepared to tell James everything I'd overheard. But as soon as I walked through the door, I knew something was terribly wrong. James was sitting in the living room, a stack of papers on the coffee table in front of him. "We need to talk, Erica," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. I approached James cautiously, the urgency of what I'd overheard momentarily forgotten. "James, what's going on?" He didn't meet my eyes as he pushed the stack of papers towards me. "I want a divorce, Erica." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the sofa for support. "What? Why? James, I don't understand." James finally looked up at me, his eyes cold and unfamiliar. "I've met someone else. She's beautiful, intelligent, and from a good family. Everything you're not." Before I could respond, he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture. A stunning brunette smiled back at me, her arm draped possessively over James's shoulder. They looked happy, intimate. "This is Amanda," James said. "We've been seeing each other for a while now. I need you to sign these and leave. Tonight." Tears blurred my vision as I mechanically signed where he indicated. I felt hollow, as if someone had scooped out my insides and left me an empty shell. "What about the house? Our stuff?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. James waved dismissively. "We'll sort out the division of property later. I don't have time for that now. Just pack what you need for a few days and leave the rest." I nodded numbly and headed to our bedroom, no, his bedroom now, to pack a bag. As I threw clothes haphazardly into a suitcase, I heard the front door open. "James? Are you home, darling? Did you get rid of her?" It was Margaret's voice, sickly sweet in a way I'd never heard before. "Yes, Mom," James replied. "Erica's packing now. She'll be gone within the hour." Margaret clapped her hands together. "Excellent. You must bring Amanda to dinner tomorrow. Your father and I are dying to meet her properly." I retreated to the bedroom, feeling sick. How could they be so callous? So cruel? I finished packing in a daze, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. When I came downstairs with my suitcase, Margaret was still there. She didn't bother to hide her triumphant smile. "Erica, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so sorry things didn't work out between you and James. Besides, don't bother coming around to see Lily anymore. It's best if you make a clean break." With those final, cutting words ringing in my ears, I stepped out into the night. The door closed behind me with a finality that seemed to echo the end of my married life. I found myself at a nearby hotel, checking in for the night in a fog of disbelief and pain. As I lay in the impersonal hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, I tried to make sense of how my life had fallen apart so quickly. The next morning, operating on autopilot, I found a small apartment to rent. It was nothing like the home I'd shared with James, but it would do. I threw myself into my work, teaching French lessons online from morning till night, anything to keep my mind occupied. A week after moving into my new apartment, my phone rang. It was Lily. My heart leapt at the sound of her voice. "Aunt Erica," she said hesitantly. "Are you okay? Grandma said you and Uncle James split up." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm okay, sweetheart. These things happen sometimes. how are you doing?" As we chatted, Lily hesitantly told me about James bringing his new girlfriend to dinner. "She's pretty," Lily said. "But she's not as nice as you. I don't like her." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I changed the subject, asking about her school and her friends. But as we talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Lily seemed nervous, on edge. Over the next few weeks, I tried to establish a new normal. One evening, as I was grading papers, my phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "Aunt Erica, I'm scared. Can we talk?" Alarmed, I immediately called her back. When she answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Aunt Erica, weird things are happening here." "What do you mean, sweetie?" I asked, concern flooding through me. Lily hesitated before continuing. "There are always these strange people coming to the house. They argue with Grandpa and Grandma a lot. They talk about money and something called a trust fund. It sounds like Grandpa and Grandma owe them something." My blood ran cold as I remembered the conversation I'd overheard about Lily's inheritance. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Lily, honey, I want you to be very careful, okay? Don't let anyone know you're telling me this." "I won't," she promised. "I've been recording some of their conversations on my phone. And I kind of got into Grandpa's computer and copied some files." I was shocked by her resourcefulness. "Lily, that's very clever, but also very dangerous. You need to be careful." The next day, I received an email from Lily. It contained audio files, photos, and documents she'd managed to gather. With shaking hands, I began to go through the material. What I discovered left me reeling. The audio recordings captured heated arguments between Richard and various individuals, all demanding repayment of large sums of money. The photos showed clandestine meetings in dimly lit rooms, with Richard handing over envelopes to shady-looking characters. But it was the documents that truly horrified me. Spreadsheets detailing the production and distribution of counterfeit medicines. Falsified lab reports. Forged prescriptions. It was all there in black and white. As I delved deeper into the files, I uncovered the true extent of the operation. Richard had set up a fictitious pharmaceutical company, using it to supply counterfeit drugs to pharmacies and clinics. Even worse, he was using these fake medicines in his own hospital, bribing doctors to cover up the deception. My hands shook as I closed my laptop. What should I do with this information? Going to the police seemed like the obvious answer, but I hesitated. What if James was involved? And what about Lily? She was living in that house, surrounded by these dangerous people. As night fell, I made a decision. Despite everything that had happened, I needed to talk to James. He deserved to know what his father was doing. I picked up my phone and dialed his number, my heart pounding. After several rings, he answered. "Erica?" His voice was confused, wary. "Why are you calling?" "James, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about your father. There's something you need to know." He was silent for a few seconds, and then he asked me to meet. I agreed, and James gave me an address, a small cafe on the outskirts of town. As I drove there, my emotions were in turmoil. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. James was sitting in a corner booth, looking haggard and older than I remembered. As I slid into the seat across from him, I noticed dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that I'd never seen before. "Erica," he began, his voice low, "I've been working with the police for months. We're building a case against my father and his entire operation." I stared at him, stunned. "What? But, the divorce? Amanda?" James ran a hand through his hair. "It was all part of the cover. I needed to distance myself from you, to keep you safe. Amanda is an undercover officer. We needed a way to get her into the family circle without suspicion." My head was spinning. "So, our marriage, it wasn't real?" "No, Erica," James said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Our marriage was the only real thing in all of this. I love you. I've always loved you. Pushing you away was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Tears welled up in my eyes as relief and anger warred within me. Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped. I couldn't risk it, James said, his voice pained. My father's network is vast. If there was even a hint that you knew something, you'd be in danger. I couldn't bear the thought of anything happening to you. As James continued to explain, I learned the full extent of the investigation. It wasn't just Richard involved, there were corrupt doctors, pharmacists, and even government officials implicated. The case was massive, with potential ramifications that reached far beyond our small town. But what about Lily? I asked, suddenly remembering my niece's fear. She's living in that house, James. She's scared. James's face darkened. I know. We're working on a way to get her out safely. But it's complicated. We talked late into the night. When we finally parted ways, James pulled me into a tight embrace. I'm so sorry for everything I put you through, he whispered. When this is all over, I promise I'll make it up to you. I clung to him, savoring the feeling of being in his arms again. But as I drove home, a nagging worry settled in my stomach. Despite James's assurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was in immediate danger. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the shrill ring of my phone. Lily's name flashed on the screen, and my heart raced as I answered. Aunt Erica. Lily's voice was a panicked whisper. They're packing. They keep saying they need to get out before it's too late. I sat bolt upright, fully alert now. Lily, listen to me carefully. Are you safe right now? Can they hear you? I'm hiding in my closet, she replied. But I don't know how long before they. Suddenly, there was a commotion on the other end of the line. I heard Lily gasp, followed by the muffled sound of a struggle. Lily? Lily! I shouted into the phone, but the line went dead. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I threw on some clothes and rushed out of my apartment. I knew I should call James or the police, but there was no time. When I arrived at the house, I saw frantic activity through the windows. Shadows moved back and forth, and I could hear raised voices inside. Taking a deep breath, I approached the front door and rang the bell. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then, the door swung open, revealing Richard's surprised face. Erica, what are you doing here? He asked, his voice strained. I plastered on a fake smile. I left some of my things here when I moved out. I was hoping I could collect them. Richard's eyes narrowed suspiciously, but before he could respond, I heard Lily's voice from inside the house. Aunt Erica, help me. Without hesitation, I pushed past Richard and ran into the house. The scene that greeted me was chaos. Suitcases were strewn about, drawers left open, papers scattered everywhere. Margaret stood in the living room, gripping Lily's arm tightly. Let her go, I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. What happened next was a blur. Richard lunged at me, but years of yoga had made me quicker than he expected. I dodged his grasp and made a dash for Lily. Margaret, in her surprise, loosened her grip, and Lily broke free, running towards me. We almost made it to the door when I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head. Richard had grabbed a heavy bookend and struck me. I stumbled, my vision blurring, but I managed to push Lily towards the door. Run, Lily! Get help! I shouted as I fell to my knees. The last thing I saw was Lily's terrified face as she ran out the door. Then, darkness engulfed me. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I found myself bound to a chair in what looked like Richard's study. My head throbbed, and I could feel something warm trickling down my neck, blood. Richard paced the room, running his hands through his hair. We need to leave now. Before the police arrive. What about her? Margaret gestured towards me. Richard's eyes met mine, and I saw a coldness there that chilled me to the bone. We can't leave any loose ends. Suddenly, we heard the distant wail of police sirens. Richard and Margaret froze, panic etched on their faces. "It's too late," Richard muttered. "We need to run. Now." As they rushed to grab their belongings, I struggled against my bonds. The sirens grew louder, and I heard car doors slamming outside. Richard and Margaret were shouting at each other now, their carefully constructed facade crumbling in the face of imminent arrest. Just as I felt the ropes loosen, the study door burst open. James rushed in, followed by several police officers. "Erica," he cried, running to my side and quickly untying me. As the police handcuffed Richard and Margaret, reading them their rights, James pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. When Lily called me, I came as fast as I could. I sagged against him, relief washing over me. "Lily? Is she safe?" James nodded. "She's outside with a social worker. She's shaken up, but she's okay." The next few days passed in a blur of police statements, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. I was diagnosed with a mild concussion from Richard's attack, but the doctors assured me I would recover fully. As I sat in the hospital bed, James by my side, we watched the news unfold on the small television in the corner of the room. The arrest of Richard, a prominent figure in our community, had sparked a media frenzy. Headlines screamed about the counterfeit drug king and the hospital of horrors. "The scale of this operation is unprecedented," a grim-faced police chief announced at a press conference. "We're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in damages, and countless lives put at risk." As we were listening to the news, reliving the traumatic events, a knock at the door interrupted us. A tall, serious-looking woman in a suit entered the room. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Detective Laura Chen. I'm leading the investigation into your father's operation. I was hoping I could ask you both a few questions." Over the next hour, we recounted everything we knew. James explained his involvement with the police investigation, while I shared the information Lily had gathered and the events leading up to my confrontation with Richard and Margaret. Detective Chen listened intently, taking notes. When we finished, she looked at us with a mix of admiration and concern. "You've both been through a lot," she said. "And I'm afraid it's not over yet. The trial is going to be long and difficult. Are you prepared for that?" James and I exchanged a look. "We'll do whatever it takes to see justice done," I said firmly. As Detective Chen left, promising to keep us updated on the case, another visitor arrived, Lily, accompanied by her social worker. "Aunt Erica," she cried, rushing to my bedside and throwing her arms around me. I was so scared. "I thought they were going to hurt you." I held her tight, feeling her small body shake with sobs. "It's okay, sweetheart. You were so brave. You saved us all. But we have another long battle ahead of us." And long it was. The case dragged on for over 2 years, making headlines across the country. As I recovered and we tried to rebuild our lives, the trial loomed over everything. Finally, after months of testimony and mountains of evidence, the verdict came in. Richard and Margaret were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. All their assets, including the trust fund they had set up for Lily, were confiscated as proceeds of crime. As we left the courthouse after the sentencing, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but at what cost? So many lives had been destroyed, including those of people I had once considered family. After the dust settled from the trial, James and I focused on rebuilding our lives. The most important part of that was Lily. We'd grown so close during the ordeal, and now it was time to make it official. The adoption process was a whirlwind of paperwork and interviews, but finally, we stood before a judge who declared us Lily's legal guardians. As we left the courthouse, Lily between us holding both our hands, I felt a surge of emotion. "We did it," I whispered to James, tears in my eyes. He squeezed my hand. "We're a real family now." With guardianship came the responsibility of managing Lily's inheritance from her parents. It was a daunting task, but we were determined to do right by her. "What do you think about renting out the house?" James suggested one evening as we pored over financial documents. I nodded. Good idea. We can put the rent money into a savings account for her college fund. We threw ourselves into the task, finding reliable tenants and setting up a separate account for Lily's future. It felt good to be planning for her future, to be giving her the stability she deserved after everything she'd been through. As we settled into our new normal, James approached me one night with a nervous energy about him. "Erica," he began, taking my hands in his. "These past few years, they've been hell. But they've also shown me how strong we are together. I was wondering, would you marry me again?" I laughed, tears springing to my eyes. "Are you kidding? Of course I will." We decided on a small ceremony, just close friends and family. The day arrived, bright and clear. As I slipped on my bright blue dress, a color of hope and new beginnings, I felt a sense of excitement I hadn't experienced in years. Lily knocked on the door, already in her bridesmaid dress. "Aunt Erica? You look like a princess." I twirled for her, feeling light and happy. "And you look absolutely beautiful. Are you ready to go?" She nodded eagerly, taking my hand. As we walked down the aisle together, I saw James waiting for me, his eyes shining with love. It felt like our first wedding all over again, but better, because now we knew what we could overcome together. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. As we exchanged vows, I looked out at our small gathering of loved ones, at Lily beaming beside us, and I knew that this was exactly where I was meant to be. At the reception, James pulled me close for our first dance. "How does it feel to be Mrs. Harrison again?" he murmured in my ear. I grinned up at him. "Even better than the first time." Later, as I watched Lily twirling on the dance floor with her friends, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Our path hadn't been easy, but we'd made it through. We were stronger for it. The next week, I was back at work, tutoring my French students online. Life had returned to a kind of normal, but it was a new normal, one filled with love, laughter, and the joy of our little family. I'm Natalie, and at 35, I thought I had my life figured out. As an interior designer, I poured my heart and soul into transforming spaces. My small apartment was my sanctuary, a place where I could retreat from the world and just be myself. Losing my parents early on wasn't easy, but it taught me to be self-reliant. I got used to the quiet evenings, the solitude that comes with being alone. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't some hermit hiding from the world. I had friends, colleagues, and a career I loved. But serious relationships? They weren't on my radar. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, I flopped onto my couch and started scrolling through my social media. It was a mindless habit, one that helped me unwind. That's when I saw the message. "Hey there, Natalie. Your designs are incredible. Have you ever thought about doing commercial spaces?" I paused, my thumb hovering over the screen. The profile picture showed a handsome guy with a warm smile. Jake Thompson, 38, business owner. I hesitated for a moment before replying. "Thanks, Jake. I've done a few commercial projects, but I mostly focus on residential spaces." "Why do you ask?" And just like that, we started chatting. At first, it was all business. He owned a small transportation company and was thinking about revamping his office. But as the days went by, our conversations drifted to other topics. Movies, books, our favorite spots in the city. It was easy, effortless. A week into our chats, Jake threw me a curveball. "Natalie, I've really enjoyed talking to you. Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" No pressure, just thought it'd be nice to meet in person. I stared at the message, my heart doing a little flip. Sure, why not? There's a great little cafe near my office. How about Saturday at 2? Saturday rolled around, and I found myself standing in front of my closet, suddenly aware of how much of my wardrobe consisted of work clothes. I settled on a casual sundress, something that said I made an effort, but I'm not trying too hard. The cafe was buzzing when I arrived. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on Jake. He was even more handsome in person, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He stood up when he saw me, waving me over. "Natalie, it's great to finally meet you," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "Likewise," I replied, sliding into the seat across from him. "I hope you haven't been waiting long." And just like that, we fell into conversation. Jake was attentive, asking thoughtful questions about my work. He told me about his transportation company, the challenges of managing a fleet of trucks and drivers. Time flew by, and before I knew it, we'd been talking for hours. As we left the cafe, Jake turned to me. "I had a great time, Natalie. Would you like to do this again sometime?" I found myself nodding before I even realized it. "Yeah, I'd like that." Over the next few weeks, Jake and I started seeing each other regularly. Our coffee dates turned into dinners, and soon we were spending most of our free time together. There was something about Jake that made me feel at ease. He was confident without being arrogant, smart without being condescending. As the months passed, our relationship deepened. Jake introduced me to his mother, Sarah, a kind woman in her 60s who had recently suffered a stroke. She lived with Jake in a modest house on the outskirts of town. "Mom, this is Natalie," Jake said, his arm around my waist. Sarah's face lit up. "Oh, Jake's told me so much about you. Come in, come in." Despite her condition, Sarah was warm and welcoming. We spent the afternoon chatting, and I found myself growing fond of her. It was clear that Jake was devoted to his mother, and seeing this softer side of him made me fall for him even more. As we were leaving, Sarah pulled me aside. "You're good for him, Natalie. I haven't seen Jake this happy in years." Her words stayed with me, warming my heart. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. Our relationship wasn't without its challenges. Jake's work often kept him busy, and there were times when I felt like I was competing with his company for attention. But he always made time for me, surprising me with lunch dates or leaving sweet notes in my apartment. A year flew by in a whirlwind of love and laughter. On our anniversary, Jake took me to the same cafe where we had our first date. As we finished our meal, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Natalie," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "This past year has been the best of my life. You brought so much joy and love into my world. I can't imagine my life without you." My breath caught in my throat as he got down on one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, unable to speak. Jake slipped the ring onto my finger, and the cafe erupted in applause. As we left, hand in hand, I couldn't stop staring at the ring. It was beautiful, but more than that, it represented a future I never thought I'd have. We decided to have a small wedding, just close friends and family. Sarah was overjoyed, insisting on helping with the planning, despite her health issues. The day of the wedding was perfect. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Jake's face light up, I knew I had made the right decision. We exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever life threw our way. At the reception, Sarah pulled me aside, her eyes glistening with tears. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, hugging me tightly. After the wedding, Jake and I decided to move into Sarah's house. It made sense, she needed care, and the house was spacious enough for all of us. I rented out my apartment, packing up my life into cardboard boxes, with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The first few months of marriage were blissful. Jake was attentive and loving, always ready with a kiss or a kind word. Sarah and I grew closer, bonding over our shared love of gardening and cooking. It felt like I had gained not just a husband, but a mother as well. Determined to help Sarah recover from her stroke, I hired a massage therapist and a therapeutic gymnastics coach. The improvements were slow, but steady. Within a few months, Sarah was walking normally, even starting to putter around in the garden and cook meals. As for Jake and me, we were in no rush to have children. We both wanted to focus on our careers and enjoy our time together. But as our first wedding anniversary approached, I noticed a subtle shift in Jake's behavior. He started staying late at work more often, citing issues with drivers or last-minute client requests. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, running a business wasn't easy, and I often worked late hours myself. One Saturday morning, as I was enjoying my coffee and a good book, Jake announced he had to go into the office. "On a weekend?" I asked, surprised. He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Yeah, some paperwork I need to catch up on. Don't wait up for me, okay?" As he left, I felt a twinge of unease. But I pushed it aside, focusing instead on my plans for the day. It was Sarah who first voiced her concerns. We were in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when she broached the subject. "Natalie, dear," she began, her voice hesitant. "Have you noticed Jake's been working a lot lately? You should keep an eye on him, you know. Don't let him take you for granted." I turned to her, surprised. "What do you mean?" She sighed, looking suddenly older. "Men, sometimes they get restless. They forget what they have at home." Her words sent a chill through me. Was she speaking from experience? I wanted to ask, but something in her expression held me back. That night, as I lay in bed waiting for Jake to come home, Sarah's words echoed in my mind. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that something might be wrong. When Jake finally crawled into bed in the early hours of the morning, I pretended to be asleep. He smelled of cigarette smoke and, was that perfume? My stomach churned, but I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't live with this uncertainty, this growing doubt. I needed to know the truth, whatever it might be. With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and searched for private investigators in our area. It felt wrong, a betrayal of trust, but the alternative, living with this gnawing suspicion, seemed worse. I found a highly rated agency and made an appointment for later that week. As I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and dread. Soon, I told myself, I would have answers. Whether I would like those answers was another matter entirely. The detective's office was small and cluttered, with files stacked haphazardly on every surface. The detective himself, a grizzled man in his 50s, introduced himself as Mike. I laid out everything, the late nights, the weekend work, the subtle changes in Jake's behavior. As I spoke, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. It felt good to voice my fears, to have someone listen without judgment. "All right," Mike said when I finished. "Here's what we'll do. We'll track his movements for a few weeks, see if we can establish a pattern. If he's up to something, we'll find out." 3 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Mike. "Mrs. Thompson, I think you should come to my office. I have some information for you." The drive to his office was a blur. My hand shook as I parked, and I had to take a moment to compose myself before going in. Mike was waiting for me, a thick file on his desk. His expression was grim. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson," he began, and my heart sank. "But your suspicions were correct. Your husband has been unfaithful." He pushed the file towards me. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside were photos, text messages, hotel receipts. Evidence of not one affair, but several. Jake had been seeing multiple women, juggling them with what appeared to be a carefully planned schedule. "He's been meeting them at various hotels," Mike explained gently. "Always on different days of the week. It seems he's been doing this for quite some time." I stared at the photos, unable to process what I was seeing. There was Jake, my Jake, with his arm around a blonde woman I'd never seen before. Another showed him kissing a redhead outside a restaurant. My stomach churned. I left Mike's office in a daze, the file clutched to my chest. As I drove home, tears blurred my vision. How could Jake do this to me? To us? What about our vows, our promises? When I pulled into our driveway, I saw that Jake's car wasn't there. Of course not. It was Thursday, according to Mike's report, that was his night with the blonde. Sarah was in the living room when I came in. One look at my face, and she knew. "Oh, Natalie," she said softly. "What happened?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. I collapsed onto the couch next to her and told her everything, my suspicions, hiring the detective, what I'd learned. Sarah reached out, gently taking the file from my hands and setting it aside. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of concern and determination, met mine. "You need to rest, dear. You can't make any decisions in this state. A clear mind is what you need now." I nodded numbly, allowing her to guide me to my feet and towards the stairs. As I climbed each step, I felt as though I was moving through molasses, my body heavy with the burden of my newfound knowledge. "We'll talk more tomorrow," Sarah promised as she saw me to my room. "Try to get some sleep." Sleep, however, proved elusive. I tossed and turned all night, my mind replaying every moment of my marriage, searching for clues I might have missed. When dawn finally broke, I gave up on rest and got ready for work. Work was a blur. I moved through the day on autopilot, my colleagues' concerned glances bouncing off the protective shell I'd built around myself. As the office emptied out for the evening, I remained at my desk, unable to face the thought of going home. It was dark by the time I finally left, the streets quiet as I made my way back to the house. As I turned onto our street, a strange sight greeted me. The garage door was wide open, and I could hear the rumble of an engine. Suddenly, Sarah came tearing out of the garage in Jake's pickup truck, the tires screeching as she swerved onto the street. My heart leapt into my throat as she barreled towards me, but at the last moment, she slammed on the brakes. "Natalie," she shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. "Get in the car. Now." Bewildered and alarmed by the wild look in her eyes, I obeyed without question, scrambling into the passenger seat. No sooner had I closed the door than Sarah floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward with a roar. In the rearview mirror, I saw Jake burst out of the house, his face contorted with rage. He ran after us, shouting and cursing, but Sarah didn't slow down. We tore down the street, leaving him behind. I turned to Sarah, my heart pounding. "What's going on?" I demanded, but the words died in my throat when I saw her expression. She looked terrified, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. We drove in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 minutes. I didn't dare speak, afraid of breaking Sarah's concentration as she navigated the darkening roads. Finally, Sarah pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner. She scanned the area carefully before killing the engine, her body still tense. "Come on," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We need to talk." Inside the diner, we slid into a booth in the far corner. Sarah ordered coffee for both of us, her eyes constantly darting to the door. When the waitress left, Sarah leaned across the table, speaking in a hushed, frantic whisper. "Natalie, listen to me carefully. We're in danger. An hour ago, I overheard Jake on the phone. He was talking about getting rid of us, Natalie. Both of us." I stared at her in shock, my mind reeling from her words. The idea that Jake could be planning to get rid of us seemed too outlandish to be true. Sarah must have sensed my disbelief, because her expression shifted from fear to determination. "You don't believe me," she said, not as a question, but a statement. Without waiting for my response, she reached into her purse and pulled out Jake's phone. "I found this in his car when I was leaving. Look for yourself." Together, Sarah and I huddled over the small screen, scrolling through Jake's messages. My heart sank as we came across a conversation with someone labeled NH Director. As we read, the truth of Sarah's words became clearer. Jake wasn't planning to kill us, but his intentions were far from innocent. He was in talks with the director of a state nursing home, discussing ways to have Sarah declared incapacitated and admitted against her will. "Oh my God," I whispered, quickly searching for reviews of the nursing home. What I found made my blood run cold. Neglect, abuse, unsanitary conditions, the stories were nightmarish. I looked up at Sarah, who seemed relieved. But as I read her some of the worst accounts, Sarah's relief turned to anger. "That's not living," she spat. "It's a slow death. It might as well be murder." But Jake's betrayal didn't end there. As we continued to scroll, we found messages to multiple women, his mistresses. The sheer number was staggering, but what hurt the most were his words about me. Once mom's out of the way, I'll leave Natalie, one message read. I'm tired of playing house. I want my freedom. I felt sick, but forced myself to keep reading, copying the messages to my email as evidence. Sarah and I sat in disgusted silence, the weight of Jake's betrayal hanging heavy between us. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice thick with emotion. I should have seen this coming, she said. Jake's father, he cheated on me too. 4 years. He even had another family, 2 kids I didn't know about until it was too late. My jaw dropped. Sarah, I had no idea. She nodded sadly. I turned a blind eye to it all. I loved him, and I was afraid he'd leave us if I confronted him. I thought, I hoped Jake would be different. That seeing his father's mistakes would make him a better man. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. But he's been this way since he was young. Always charming, always with a new girl on his arm. I lost count of how many hearts he broke. When he married you, Natalie, I thought he'd finally grown up. I was so happy. I took a deep breath. I'm going to divorce him. I can't stay with someone who would do this to us. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Then, to my surprise, she began to cry softly. Please, she whispered, don't leave me. I can't face this alone. Without hesitation, I moved to her side of the booth, wrapping my arms around her. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah. We're family, and we'll get through this together. I promise. As Sarah and I sat in the diner booth, emotionally drained from our discoveries, I felt a weight pressing on my chest. There was one more piece of news I needed to share, something that complicated our situation even further. Sarah, I began, my voice barely above a whisper, there's something else you should know. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I'm pregnant. I found out just this morning at work. I don't know what to do. Sarah's expression hardened, a fierce determination replacing her initial shock. I'll tell you what we're going to do, she said, her voice strong and resolute. We're going to fight back. Jake doesn't get to destroy our lives and walk away unscathed. It's time we took control. We paid for our coffee and headed back to the truck. The drive home was tense, but filled with a sense of purpose. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Jake's car parked haphazardly, a clear sign of his agitated state. Taking a deep breath, Sarah and I entered the house. Jake was pacing in the living room, his face contorted with rage. As soon as he saw us, he exploded. Mom, what the hell were you thinking, taking off with my truck? And my phone? Have you lost your mind? Before Sarah could respond, I stepped forward, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. I held up the file from the private investigator. Jake, we need to talk. His eyes darted from me to the file, realization dawning on his face. For a moment, he looked panicked, but then his expression smoothed into one of cool indifference. So, you know, he said, his voice eerily calm. What are you going to do about it, Natalie? Divorce me? Yes, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I want a divorce. To my shock, Jake laughed. Come on, Natalie. You're overreacting. So I had a few flings. It doesn't mean anything. You're not enough for me, but we can make this work. You can stay, be a good wife, and I'll be discreet with my extracurricular activities. I felt a surge of anger and disgust. You must be joking. I don't need a Ravella like you in my life, Jake. We're done. Jake's face darkened. He pointed to the door, his voice low and menacing. Fine. Get out. This is my house, and I want you gone. Before I could respond, Sarah stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. Actually, Jake, this is my house. I own it, and I decide who stays and who goes. She took a deep breath. And I'm telling you to leave. Now. Jake's jaw dropped, disbelief written all over his face. Mom, what are you saying? I'm your son. And Natalie? She's nothing to you. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened. You're wrong, Jake. Natalie is like a daughter to me. She's family. Then, with a pointed look at me, she added, and she's carrying my grandchild. Jake's eyes widened, darting to my stomach. For a moment, hope flickered across his face. You're pregnant? Then I can't leave home. The baby needs a father. I shook my head, my resolve stronger than ever. This child doesn't need a father like you, Jake. We'll be fine without you. Sarah nodded in agreement. You heard her, Jake. It's time for you to go. We'll have the locks changed in the morning. Jake looked from Sarah to me, realization dawning that he had lost this battle. Without another word, he stormed upstairs, presumably to pack his things. As the sound of his angry footsteps faded, I turned to Sarah, overwhelmed by the events of the day. She pulled me into a tight hug, and I felt the tension begin to leave my body. The months following that fateful night were a whirlwind of legal battles, emotional turmoil, and new beginnings. The divorce proceedings were messy, as expected, but with the mountain of evidence we had gathered, Jake didn't stand a chance. I sat in the courtroom, my hand resting protectively over my growing belly, as the judge delivered her verdict. Jake's numerous infidelities, coupled with his attempts to manipulate Sarah's living situation, worked heavily in my favor. The judge's stern voice echoed through the room as she awarded me a substantial compensation package. Mr. Thompson, she said, her eyes boring into Jake, your actions have been reprehensible. This court finds in favor of Mrs. Thompson and orders you to pay compensation for emotional distress. I watched Jake's face contort with anger and disbelief. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness for the man I thought I had married. But as I caught Sarah's supportive gaze from the gallery, I knew we had made the right decision. After the court proceedings, Sarah and I sat in her kitchen, our kitchen now, sipping tea and processing the day's events. I've made some changes to my will, Sarah said suddenly, sliding a document across the table to me. I skimmed the paper, my eyes widening as I realized what I was reading. Sarah, you can't. This is too much. She reached out, clasping my hand in hers. Natalie, you and that baby are my family now. Jake, he made his choices. I've disinherited him. The house, my savings, they're yours and my grandson's now. As my due date approached, Sarah and I spent our evenings preparing the nursery. One night, as we folded tiny onesies and arranged stuffed animals, Sarah turned to me with a serious expression. Natalie, she said, her voice soft but determined, I want you to know that we're going to raise this boy right. He's going to grow up to be a man who respects women, who understands the value of loyalty and honesty. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. You're right. He won't have his father around, but maybe that's for the best. He won't have to see that negative example. Sarah's eyes misted over. I made mistakes with Jake. I let him see his father's behavior and didn't do enough to counteract it. But this time it'll be different. This little boy will grow up surrounded by strong women who won't tolerate disrespect or infidelity. I'm Emma. My first big break after college was landing a job at Mason Trading Company as a lawyer's assistant. It was a bustling place, always buzzing with activity and ringing phones that hardly ever stopped. I loved the pace, it kept me on my toes. In those early days, while I was still figuring out which elevator took me where, I ran into Tom. He worked in the purchasing department, just a corridor away from our legal offices. He was arguing over the phone about some shipment that got delayed. He hung up, noticed me watching, and rolled his eyes. Suppliers, he muttered. Tough day? I asked, half smiling. You could say that. Every day is a battlefield here. You knew? Yeah, just started this week. I'm Emma. Tom. Welcome to the madness. Don't let the chaos scare you off. We started having lunch together, mostly because it was easier to navigate the huge cafeteria with someone who knew the place. Tom was easy to talk to, had a sharp wit, and wasn't shy about saying exactly what he thought. One lunch turned into many, and soon, those lunches turned into after-work drinks. Our conversations ranged from mundane work stuff to more personal topics. I learned he was an only child, adored by his mother, but constantly nagged for not living up to his potential, whatever that meant. "You haven't met my mom yet, but brace yourself when you do," Tom warned one evening as we grabbed beers after a particularly long day. "She has this idea of the perfect woman, and trust me, no one's good enough." It wasn't long before our friendship took a romantic turn. After about a year of dating, Tom proposed. The wedding was simple, but perfect, for us. We bought an apartment together with savings I had from my grandma and his savings. It felt like everything was falling into place. Life with Tom was mostly smooth, except for the occasional bickering about who forgot to buy milk or whose turn it was to clean the apartment. But nothing too heavy, just the usual stuff couples go through. Until one day, everything felt different. I was exhausted all the time, and even the smell of coffee, which I loved, made me nauseous. One morning, struggling to even get out of bed, I decided enough was enough. I booked an appointment with my doctor, thinking maybe I had the flu or something. Sitting in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine without really reading it, my name was finally called. Dr. Lena was always straight to the point, and after a few questions and tests, she dropped the news. "Well, Emma, congratulations are in order. You're pregnant." "Pregnant?" I repeated, the word foreign and heavy. "Are you sure?" "Quite sure," Dr. Lena smiled, handing me the test result. "But you need to be careful. Your body's signaling a few warning signs. Nothing too scary, but you need rest, less stress." I nodded, my mind racing. Pregnant? How would Tom react? I couldn't tell over the phone. This needed a face-to-face. Walking through the door of our apartment that evening, I found Tom on the couch, eyes glued to his phone. "Tom, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaky. "I went to the doctor today. We're going to have a baby." Tom's face changed. It wasn't the reaction I'd hoped for. "A baby? Emma, it's not great timing, you know? We haven't even traveled like we talked about. And a baby? That's a huge change." I felt a pang in my heart. "I know it's unexpected, but it's also kind of amazing, right? We're going to be parents." Tom ran his hands through his hair, a sign he was stressed. "I don't know, Emma. It's too much. It's too soon." "Too soon for a family with me?" I asked, hurt coloring my tone. "No, that's not what I mean. I just thought we'd have more time, just us two." The conversation went in circles. Tom saying it was bad timing, me trying to highlight the positive. By the end of it, Tom had closed off, and I was left feeling alone, holding on to a piece of news that should have brought us together but instead was pushing us apart. The next day, I spoke to my boss, Mr. Harlow. I needed some accommodation, given the doctor's orders. "Mr. Harlow, I need to ask for a change. I'm pregnant, and there are some complications. Could I possibly work from home?" Mr. Harlow, who was always more understanding than I gave him credit for, didn't hesitate. "Of course, Emma. We'll set up everything you need at home. Take care of yourself and the little one." Going home that day, I hoped Tom had softened a bit. But when I told him about the remote work arrangement, his reaction was cold. "So, you're just going to be home now? What about all the plans we had?" "I thought you'd be happy I found a solution to keep the stress down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Emma, it's like you're not even listening." I said it's too soon for all this. Tom snapped back. I went to bed early that night, feeling the distance between us grow. As I lay there, the reality of my situation sinking in, I realized this journey was going to be tougher than I thought. The air in our apartment felt heavier these days, like each day was a cloudy one, even if the sun was shining outside. Tom's affection seemed to drain away as quickly as it came. He grew more distant, more irritated by the small ways my life had to change because of the pregnancy. He said he felt neglected, like he was second to my health and the baby's needs. His mom, Mrs. Blackwell, was no help either. She called one afternoon, her voice as cold as the winter wind. "Emma, this child. It's not the right time. You should be focusing on supporting Tom, not dragging him into fatherhood." I clenched the phone tighter, fighting the sting in my eyes. "It's not like I planned this by myself, Mrs. Blackwell. It's our child, not just mine. There are options, you know. You're just choosing the most selfish one." Her words sliced through me, leaving me feeling hollow inside. As if that wasn't enough, Tom's behavior started changing even more. His cologne was masked by another scent, a woman's perfume, unfamiliar and sweet, clinging to his clothes. The first time I smelled it, I convinced myself it was a mix-up at the dry cleaner. But then, it happened again. And again. He also started staying out late, mumbling about needing to catch up on work, and his weekends were booked up with sudden business trips. It was too much to chalk up to coincidence. I held my tongue, not wanting to believe the worst, but the seed of doubt was planted. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That Saturday, when Tom mentioned another business trip, I reached out to Mike, an old classmate who now worked as a detective. We met at a small cafe, the kind where you could talk without every table overhearing your conversation. Mike slid a folder across the table to me. "I got what you asked for, Emma. You sure you want to see this?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, and opened the folder. The photos were clear, unmistakable. There was Tom, and with him, a woman I recognized from his office, a new hire that he'd mentioned in passing. "Emma, I'm sorry," Mike said, his voice low. "There's video too. It's consistent." My heart sank to the soles of my feet. "Thanks, Mike. I needed to know." I went home, numb and carrying the folder like it was made of lead. As I turned the key in the lock, the door swung open. Mrs. Blackwell stood there, her face twisted in disapproval. "I came to see how you are. Tom said he's worried about you, all alone here." Her eyes darted around, suspiciously. "I know about Tom. He's not on a business trip. He's with someone else, Mrs. Blackwell." She scoffed, her defense quick and sharp. "You're driving him away. Always sick, complaining, needing things. What man wants that?" "That's no excuse for cheating," I shot back, anger rising. "And you think having his baby will fix things?" "No one in the family wants this child, Emma. Only you." Her words were like a physical blow. "Get out," I said, my voice trembling. "Now." She threw her hands up and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence after was deafening. I sat on the couch, feeling numb and hollow. 30 minutes felt like an eternity as each second passed with heavy, painful ticks, echoing the throbbing in my heart. My mind was racing, but a dreadful resolve settled over me. I had to face Tom and see the truth with my own eyes. Mike had given me all the details I needed. There at the Grandview Hotel, room 718, he'd said, his voice filled with reluctant professionalism. My hands were shaking slightly as I parked the car and walked into the hotel lobby, my stomach in knots. I took the elevator, my heart pounding in my ears with each floor it passed. When the doors opened, I stepped out into a brightly lit hallway that felt too cheery for what I was about to do. Room 718 was just down the hall, and as I approached, I could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses. My hand trembled as I knocked on the door. "Room service must be here with the champagne." I heard a woman's voice, chirpy and carefree. After a few seconds that felt like hours, the door swung open. Tom looked out, his expression changing from anticipation to shock in an instant. "Emma? What? How did you find?" "I know everything, Tom," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Without waiting for an invitation, I pushed past him into the room. The sight that greeted me was like a slap. There she was, his mistress, half-dressed, scrambling to cover up as if modesty meant anything now. Tom recovered from his initial shock and his face hardened. "Why are you here, Emma? To spy on me? To beg?" "Beg?" I echoed, incredulous, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "I came for the truth, Not that you'd know anything about that. He scoffed, stepping closer. You want the truth? Here it is. I'm not happy with you anymore. You're always so wrapped up in yourself and this baby. His mistress, now somewhat dressed, smirked and added, maybe if you paid more attention to him, he wouldn't be with me. Her words stung, but it was his agreement, the nod he gave her, that twisted the knife deeper. Yeah, you should be thanking us. We're just waiting for your baby to be born. Then I can finally move on properly. The room spun around me, and a sharp pain stabbed through my abdomen. I doubled over, gasping, the shock and pain mingling into a nauseating swirl. Tom, I think something's wrong, I managed to say, my voice a whisper of desperation. Please, call an ambulance. He and his mistress exchanged a look, a quick, dismissive glance, and then he turned back to me. You're probably just overreacting, like always. They dressed quickly, stepping over me as if I were just another obstacle in their path. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was the closing door, the click of it shutting echoing ominously in the cold, empty room. I woke up to the gentle, yet urgent, voice of a maid trying to rouse me. Ma'am? Ma'am, can you hear me? Her face swam into view as I blinked away the darkness clouding my vision. The pain was still there, a dull ache that seemed to echo through my entire body. Where am I? My voice sounded hoarse, foreign even to my own ears. You're still in the hotel room, dear. I found you on the floor. I'm calling an ambulance now. True to her word, the next thing I knew, I was being wheeled through the emergency room. The hospital lights were harsh, blinding, as nurses and doctors swarmed around, their voices a cacophony of concern that I could barely comprehend. They asked questions, too many questions, but all I could think about was the betrayal and the pain. Tom never showed up at the hospital. Neither did his mother. Calls went unanswered, their silence more painful than any physical wound. By the time the doctor came with the news that I had lost the baby, the grief was so heavy, so overwhelming, it was all I could do not to scream. The loss was not just a personal tragedy, it felt like an injustice, one that Tom, his mistress, and his mother had a hand in. They had abandoned me, left me alone at my most vulnerable. The bitterness and anger stewed inside me, brewing a storm. After what felt like an eternity, the hospital discharged me. I drove straight to our apartment, and began packing Tom's things. Each shirt I folded, each sock I threw into the box, was a severance, a cutting of ties. With his belongings piled in the trunk of my car, I drove to Mrs. Blackwell's house. I didn't bother with niceties. I unloaded his things right in the driveway, letting them fall wherever they may. I didn't knock, I just walked in. Mrs. Blackwell was sitting in the living room, a look of resignation on her face. She knew why I was there. Emma, she started, her tone weary. You should just leave. Take what dignity you have left. Dignity? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think I came here for a lecture on dignity from you? He's my son. I stand by him. And he will be better off without you, she said bluntly. He has excellent lawyers. You'll only embarrass yourself. At that, something snapped inside me. Do you even care that your grandchild is gone? That your son left me alone in a hotel room to lose his child? Her eyes flickered away, unable to meet mine. It's a tough situation. It's done, Emma. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. How did you feel, as a mother, knowing what happened? Knowing your grandchild was lost? She didn't answer, just looked away, a crack in her composed facade. I will see your son in court, I said, the words heavy with promise. You can tell him that. Turning on my heel, I left her sitting there, alone with the weight of her choices. As I walked back to my car, the cool air felt sharp against my skin, but my path had never been clearer. I would fight. Not just for me, but for the life that was lost, and for the truth that needed seeing the light of day. Stepping into the courthouse, I felt every eye on me, or maybe it was just the weight of what was about to happen pressing down. My best friend from college, Lucy, was right beside me. She'd become a shark in the courtroom, known for tearing apart even the slickest defense. When I told her about everything, she didn't hesitate. "I've got this, Emma. And don't worry about the fees. This one's on me," Lucy had said, her voice fierce and reassuring. We sat at our table, papers neatly arranged, evidence at the ready. Across from us, Tom and his mistress looked confident, a smugness that irked me. As the proceedings began, their lawyer painted a picture of me as unstable, broken by grief into fabricating stories. The plaintiff has suffered immense emotional distress, yes, which has led to these wild accusations. There is no substantial evidence of any affair or wrongdoing on my client's part. When it was our turn, Lucy stood, her presence commanding the room. "Your Honor, not only do we have substantial evidence, but we also have a testimony that will corroborate everything my client has claimed." She presented the photos first, clear and undeniable proof of the affair, passed around for the judge and eventually to the opposing counsel, who looked visibly shaken as they viewed them. Next, Lucy played the video from the hotel. The room fell silent as the scene played out. I enter the hotel, then Tom and his mistress, laughing, hugging, leave the hotel without a hint of concern. "But that's not all," Lucy continued. She called the maid who found me to the stand. Her testimony was simple, but powerful. "I found her on the floor, unconscious. They were gone. She could have died." Tom's face had gone white, and his mistress couldn't sit still, her leg bouncing nervously. When they were given a chance to respond, Tom stood up, his voice shaky. This isn't how it looks. We were just scared and confused." "Scared? So you leave your pregnant wife unconscious on the floor?" Lucy shot back, her tone icy. The judge took everything into consideration, the weight of the evidence, the testimonies. After what felt like a lifetime, he spoke. "I find in favor of the plaintiff, Emma Blackwell. The evidence of infidelity and negligence is overwhelming. I am granting a 50-50 division of all marital assets, as well as financial compensation for the emotional distress caused by the actions of the defendants." As we walked out of the courtroom, Lucy elbowed me gently, a victorious glint in her eye. "How's that for justice?" I managed a small smile, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. "Thanks, Lucy. I couldn't have done this without you." Life had been limping back to normal after the courtroom drama. I bought a small apartment, and every new piece of furniture, every picture hung, was a step away from my past torment. The only shadow that loomed over my fresh start was seeing Tom and his mistress together at work, a constant reminder of the betrayal. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some legal briefs, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a while. It was Tom's mother, Mrs. Blackwell. "Emma, could we meet?" I need to talk to you." Her voice trembled over the phone. I hesitated, memories of our last encounter flashing through my mind. "Why should I meet you, Mrs. Blackwell?" "It's about Tom, and your company." "Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Curiosity piqued and a bit of old loyalty to the company that stood by me, I agreed. We met at a small cafe, away from prying eyes. She looked worn, her eyes rimmed with red, as if she had been crying. "Tom, he's not the boy I raised anymore," she started, not meeting my eyes. "He and that woman, they're planning to cheat the company, sell off assets, and they want to force me out of my home." Her words hung heavy between us. I was still processing when she grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please, you're the only one I can trust to stop this." The plea in her eyes was real, but so was my reluctance. "Mrs. Blackwell, your family drama is not my business anymore." "It's not just family, Emma. It's your company too. They're planning something big. It could ruin everything." Her urgency struck a chord. I was, after all, part of that company. It had given me a chance when I was just a college grad, and many of my colleagues were like family. "All right, I'll look into it," I conceded, more for the company than for her. Back at work, I started digging. I quietly pulled records and contracts, tracing the trail of transactions Tom and his mistress were involved in. It didn't take long to spot irregularities. The numbers didn't add up, goods were being purchased at inflated prices, far above market value. Armed with evidence, I made my way to the director's office. Laying the documents on his desk, I watched his eyes narrow as he scanned the evidence. "This is serious," Mr. Harlow stated flatly, looking up at me. "I'll handle this from here. Thank you, Emma. You may have just saved this company from a significant loss." Leaving his office, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. Walking past Tom and his mistress, I caught snippets of their mocking laughter. I couldn't help but smile to myself. Justice had a way of finding its path, no matter how twisted the road might be. After exposing Tom and his mistress, a full-scale investigation rippled through the company. As it unfolded, I was often called to testify, detailing every discrepancy and irregular transaction I had uncovered. The courtroom once again became a familiar setting, but this time I stood confidently, bolstered by the truth and the mountains of evidence that supported our claims. The legal battles were intense and draining. Tom and his mistress faced the consequences head-on. The company, having suffered significant potential losses, pursued justice relentlessly, culminating in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the duo. The verdict was as expected, guilty. The court's decision barred them from holding any senior positions in the future, a fitting end to their corporate malfeasance. Amidst the chaos, my own career took a surprising but welcome turn. The company recognized my efforts and promoted me to a senior lawyer, an acknowledgement that came with a significant award. One quiet afternoon, as I was organizing files in my new office, a spacious room with a view of the city skyline, my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I hadn't seen in a long while. "Mrs. Blackwell." "Emma, it's me," her voice came through, tinged with humility, a stark contrast to our last encounters. I wanted to thank you for saving my home from being sold out from under me." Her gratitude was genuine, and despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy for her. "You're welcome. I did what I felt was right." There was a pause, a breath of silence, before she added, "I was wrong about you, Emma. So very wrong. I used to think you didn't deserve my son, but I've come to realize it was he who didn't deserve you." Her words, unexpected and raw, took me by surprise. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you might know. Could we meet? I'd like to apologize properly, face to face," she suggested, a hint of hope in her tone. I considered her request. "All right, Mrs. Blackwell. Let's meet." We decided on a quiet cafe, neutral ground, for what was to be a frank conversation. Sitting across from her, I saw the changes the months had wrought on her. Gone was the haughty demeanor, replaced by a somber reflectiveness. "Emma, I'm sorry for everything. I was blinded by my own expectations, my own desires for Tom, that I couldn't see the truth. You were always the stronger person, and I admire that deeply now," she confessed, her eyes not meeting mine. "It's been a tough journey for us all," I acknowledged, my voice steady. "But your apology is accepted, Mrs. Blackwell." We talked more, about life, about lessons learned. It was clear that friendship wasn't on the table, but mutual respect hung in the balance, a fine thread that connected our shared history. Leaving the cafe, I felt lighter, as if her words had lifted some of the shadows of the past. I walked back to my office, past the now empty desks of Tom and his mistress, a reminder of the bullet dodged. Their laughter no longer echoed through the halls. Instead, my own steps sounded a steady beat towards the future. So, there I was, Jenna, just cruising through the local park, headphones in, blaring some old-school rock. The breeze was nice, and it was just one of those perfect days for being lost in your own world. I'd just wrapped up a coding sprint for the new app one was developing. Working from home has its perks, like no one cares if you're in your pajamas at 3 in the afternoon. As I was rounding the bend near the old oak tree, that's when it happened. Out of nowhere, I collided with what felt like a brick wall, sending my phone flying and ripping my headphones out. I barely had time to register the surprised yelp that matched mine. "Oh, crap. I'm so sorry." I blurted out, scrambling to my feet, brushing dirt off my jeans. The brick wall turned out to be a guy, probably around my age, with a shock of brown hair and a kind of sheepish grin that immediately put me at ease. He was already picking up my phone, checking if it was okay. "Hey, no harm done, but maybe watch where you're dancing next time." He chuckled, handing back my phone which, thank God, was still in one piece. "Thanks, and yeah, I guess I got carried away with the tunes. I'm Jenna, by the way," I said, still a bit embarrassed, but relieved he was cool about it. "I'm Jake. Seems like you've got a killer taste in music," Jake said, nodding towards my phone. We both laughed it off, and I noticed he was holding a frisbee. "You play?" I asked, gesturing to it. "Yeah, was just about to start a game with some friends, but they bailed." "You play?" "Not really, but there's a first time for everything, right?" I shrugged. It wasn't like I had plans, and he seemed like good company. "Cool, let me show you the ropes then." His smile was infectious, and honestly, I was already curious about him. We spent the next hour tossing the frisbee, chatting about everything from our favorite bands to our jobs. Turns out, Jake was an engineer at a local tech startup, which gave us tons to talk about since we were both in the tech field. It felt so easy, like chatting with an old friend. As the sun began to set, Jake glanced at his watch. "Hey, you hungry? I was gonna grab a bite at the cafe across the street. Join me?" I was actually starving, and I figured, why not? "Sure, let's go. But just a heads up, if they have chili fries, I'm not sharing," I warned him playfully. "Huh, challenge accepted. Let's see if their chili fries are worth the hype then," he said as we started walking towards the cafe. By the time we said goodbye, it was clear this wasn't going to be just a one-time thing. Jake asked for my number, and I gave it to him, feeling that buzz you get when you know something good just started. After a few months of dating Jake, things were going pretty damn well. But like every romantic movie where the sun's always shining, there had to be a cloud somewhere. That cloud, in my story, turned out to be Linda, Jake's mom. "So, you're finally going to meet my mom," Jake said one Saturday morning as we were having breakfast. He had this half-smile, half-wince thing going on. "Just a heads up, she's a bit intense." "Intense like how?" "Like secret government conspiracy intense or believes in aliens intense?" I joked, trying to lighten the mood. "More like reads your horoscope and judges your life choices intense," he replied, shaking his head. We drove over to Linda's house later that day. It was one of those perfectly manicured homes you see on TV shows where you know something's too good to be true. Jake knocked, and the door swung open. There she was, Linda, in all her glory, wearing a flowery dress that screamed, "I'm the boss here." "Jakey, and you must be Jenna," Linda said, eyeing me like I was some specimen under a microscope. Come in, come in." The living room looked like it was ripped straight out of a 1950s home decor magazine, complete with a giant bookshelf filled with all sorts of astrology books. I kid you not, there was a crystal ball on the coffee table. Linda wasted no time. "So, Jenna, when's your birthday?" she asked, as soon as we sat down on her floral couch. April 17th, I said, a bit thrown off by the sudden interest in astrology. "Aries, huh? She frowned, flipping through one of her many books. "And Jakey here is a Pisces. Not the best match, astrologically speaking. You do know that, right?" Jake rolled his eyes, giving me a sorry about this look. "Mom, come on, not everyone believes in that stuff." "But they should, especially when it comes to important life decisions," Linda shot back, giving me a sharp look. "You see, Jenna, Aries are headstrong and impulsive, and Pisces are dreamers, sensitive. It can lead to conflicts, you know." I wasn't sure how to respond. I mean, who goes full psychic mode 5 minutes after meeting someone? "Well, we've been getting along just fine so far," I managed to say, trying not to offend her but also standing my ground. Linda hummed disapprovingly, tapping her fingers on her astrology book. "We'll see about that. Life's not just about the good times, dear." The rest of the visit was pretty awkward. Linda kept dropping hints about ensuring compatibility and watching out for the retrogrades. I couldn't believe the stuff coming out of her mouth. Jake was super apologetic on the drive home. "Sorry about that. She can be a bit much," he admitted, looking genuinely embarrassed. "A bit much? Jake, she basically said we're doomed because I'm an Aries," I said, trying to laugh it off, but honestly, it stung a bit. Driving back, I mulled over everything. Linda was definitely a force to be reckoned with, but I wasn't about to let her or her astrological charts dictate my relationship. I liked Jake a lot, and no amount of bad star alignment was going to change that. So there we were, a year into this whirlwind, and somehow, despite all the cosmic crap Linda tried to throw our way, Jake popped the question. We were at our favorite pizza spot. Jake got all nervous, which was funny because he's usually Mr. Cool. He slipped the ring box across the table right as I was about to dive into a slice. "Jenna, will you marry me?" he blurted out, almost knocking over his drink. I was so shocked I nearly choked on my pizza. "Hell yes," I managed to get out, once I stopped coughing. Everyone around us started clapping, and I was just there, all teary-eyed and laugh-crying. Planning the wedding, on the other hand, was anything but beautiful at first. Trying to make a guest list and figure out a venue was stressful enough without Linda's constant input. "You know, Jenna, Mars is in retrograde around your wedding date. That's really not a good sign," Linda warned one afternoon, while we were looking over some flower arrangements at my place. I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might stick that way. "Linda, we're not picking a date based on Mars, Mercury, or any planet. We're picking it because the venue we want is available then, and it's special to us." The wedding day finally came, and despite Linda's dire predictions, it was perfect. Sunny skies, not too hot, not too cold. All our friends and family were there, laughing and having a good time. Even Linda managed to put on a smile, though it looked a bit forced. After the ceremony, during the reception, Linda pulled me aside. Her expression was serious, which wasn't surprising given our past chats. "Jenna, I still think you should reconsider this union. You might be happy now, but what about when the stars shift?" I had just about enough at this point. "Linda, I'm married to your son now. I'm not reconsidering anything. We're happy, and that's what matters." She huffed a bit, looking around as if the answer was going to pop out from behind the wedding cake. "You're ignoring the signs, Jenna. But remember, I warned you." "Duly noted, Linda. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to dance with my husband at our wedding, which, by the way, is going wonderfully despite the bad signs." Jake caught my eye from across the room and gave me a thumbs up, knowing all too well the conversation I'd just survived. We spent the rest of the night dancing, laughing, and truly enjoying every moment. Life after the wedding felt like a sweet dream, but as with all dreams, reality has a way of creeping in. Linda's relentless comments were that reality for me. Every time we visited, she'd have some snarky comment ready. One Sunday afternoon, we were at her place for what I hoped would be a peaceful visit. No such luck. "So, Jenna," Linda began as she served the tea, "still no good news on the baby front? You know, I read that some people are just cursed. Bad energy or something." I almost choked on my tea. "Linda, really, that's not how it works. We've seen the doctor, everything's fine. These things take time." "Time, huh? Or maybe it's just not meant to be." She shrugged, sipping her tea like she hadn't just suggested my uterus was cursed. I was fuming, but Jake squeezed my hand under the table, a silent plea to keep my cool. Changing the subject, I mentioned our latest big project. "Actually, we've been house hunting. Found a great place, and we're thinking of putting down an offer." Linda perked up, her interest obviously piqued. "A house, huh? And how are you affording that?" "Jake's doing well, but houses aren't cheap." I was proud of our independence and financial stability. "Actually, I've been doing really well with the app development. We're putting in equal amounts." She scoffed, setting down her cup a little too hard. "Well, isn't that convenient? Living off my son and now spending his money on a house. It's classic, really." We left soon after, but her words stung. It was the same old song, no matter how hard I worked or what I achieved. The house buying process was a breath of fresh air compared to dealing with Linda. We found a beautiful place, perfect for us, and moved in a couple of months later. I thought owning our new home would prove to Linda that I wasn't the gold digger she painted me to be. But instead, it just fueled her fire. At our housewarming, which Linda attended out of familial obligation more than anything, she pulled me aside while Jake was busy with other guests. Must be nice, living large on someone else's dime. But we both know the truth, don't we? Just make sure he doesn't find out about your little side flings, she hissed, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. I stared at her, shocked and angry. What are you even talking about? I've never cheated on Jake, and I never would. How dare you? She just smirked and walked away, leaving me there, fuming. Later, I heard through the grapevine that Linda was spreading rumors about me being a freeloader and cheating on Jake. That was the last straw. I confronted Jake when we were alone. Your mom's saying things, awful things about me. I don't know how much more I can take. Jake was furious. She what? That's it. I'm going to have a word with her. This has to stop. He did, and he told Linda she needed to back off or she wouldn't be welcome in our home anymore. She didn't take it well and called me the next day, furious. You're trying to cut me off from my son, you witch. I know what you're up to, bringing men into the house when Jake's gone. Don't think I don't know. Her words were like venom, but they didn't hold any power over me anymore. Linda, believe what you want, but I'm telling you now, stop spreading lies about me, or you'll regret it. This is my home, and I won't be harassed in it. Things had quieted down since we limited Linda's visits, but calm in my life seems to be just the quiet before another storm. This new trouble started innocently enough, just a feeling that something was off. It began at the local grocery store. I was loading bags into the car when I got this prickly feeling on the back of my neck, like someone was watching me. I glanced around and caught a glimpse of a man at the far end of the parking lot. He was just standing there, staring. It was weird, but I brushed it off as paranoia. The next sighting was at the cafe down the street from our house. The same man, sitting 2 tables away, pretending to read a newspaper, but clearly watching me. My heart started pounding. Was I being followed? When I saw him a third time, just standing across the street from our house, that's when I really freaked out. This was no coincidence. This guy was tracking me. I told Jake about it that night. Babe, there's this guy, I've seen him around a lot lately, and it feels like he's following me. Jake looked concerned, but he was trying to be the rational one. Are you sure? Maybe you're just overworked and stressed. Why don't you take a break for a few days? Do some of that yoga you love, chill out a bit? I wasn't convinced, but I decided maybe a break would help. I started doing yoga again, tried to meditate, but that nagging feeling wouldn't leave me. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. One afternoon, I had enough. I was going to prove I wasn't imagining things. I went to the same grocery store, and sure enough, there he was. This time I confronted him. I walked straight up to him, my phone camera ready. Why are you following me? Who are you? The man looked startled, then tried to walk away, but I was too quick. I snapped a few pictures. I've called the cops, I lied. He stopped, a look of panic crossing his face. Wait, listen, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm a private investigator. I'm sorry, I can't say more. In the evening, we ran into him again in the parking lot of our house. Jake confronted him, grabbing him by the collar. You better start talking, or I'm calling the cops right now. The man finally broke. Look, I was hired by your mother. She wanted proof of infidelity. I swear, I didn't find anything, because there's nothing to find. Jake called Linda immediately. Mom, what the hell are you doing? Hiring someone to spy on Jenna? Don't come to our house again. You're not welcome here anymore. The next day, Jake was all action. He had security cameras installed all around the house. "If she's pulling stunts like this, who knows what she'll do next," he said, anger lacing his every word. After all the drama with Linda and that creepy PI, Jake suggested something I couldn't have been happier about: a vacation. Just the two of us, away from all the chaos, somewhere I could breathe without feeling like someone was always watching. We ended up at this cozy little beach town, with nothing but the sound of waves and seagulls to keep us company. It was perfect. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could just sit, read a book under the sun, and not worry about secretive glances or hidden agendas. When we got back home, I was brimming with a sense of peace. That peace only grew when I discovered something incredible: I was pregnant. After years of trying and facing Linda's harsh words, it had finally happened. But with the joy came a wave of protectiveness. Given everything with Linda, the last thing I wanted was to put our little bubble of happiness at risk. So, we decided to keep the pregnancy under wraps, especially from Linda. "Let's just keep it between us and my folks for now," I told Jake, who was over the moon about the baby. "Yeah, I don't want my mom spoiling this with her negativity. We'll tell the world when we're ready," he agreed. Since I worked from home, hiding my growing belly wasn't as hard as it might have been. I swapped my fitted tees for looser shirts, and if I ever went out, I was all about those flowy dresses. But the thing was, my belly wasn't really showing that much. I was past my first trimester, yet there was barely a bump. I mentioned it to my doctor during one of my checkups, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. He gave me a reassuring smile. "Every woman's body is different, Jenna. Some show a lot, and some don't show much at all. As long as the scans are normal and the baby's healthy, you've got nothing to worry about." As the weeks rolled on, only Jake, my parents, and I knew about the little life growing inside me. It felt like our precious secret, a small miracle just for us. We'd sit in what would be the nursery, planning and dreaming about the future. "I think we should paint it yellow," Jake said one evening, looking around the room. "Yellow's nice. Bright and happy," I agreed, picturing our little one in their crib, the walls a sunny backdrop. This little bubble of joy was ours to cherish, and for now, that was all that mattered. Linda's shadow lingered at the edge of our happiness, but inside our home, within our little growing family, we were safe. 8 months in, and my pregnancy was now pretty obvious, no more hiding the baby bump. Jake and I decided it was time to celebrate with all our family and friends, even Linda. I figured maybe if she saw how real and beautiful this was, she might drop her vendetta. We threw a big bash at our place, decorating the backyard with lights and flowers. I felt like royalty, floating among our guests with Jake by my side, everyone so excited and happy for us. Well, almost everyone. Linda arrived late, her face stormy as ever. I braced myself for her usual antics, but hoped she'd keep it together for the sake of the day. No such luck. As I was mingling, I overheard her chatting, well, more like conspiring, with a group of relatives. "This is all a show," Linda hissed, not even bothering to lower her voice. "Mark my words, she's not pregnant. It's just a ploy to bind Jake tighter and dig into his wallet more." Her words stung, but I wasn't about to let her ruin this day. I approached her, smoothing down my dress, trying to keep my voice even. "Linda, can we talk?" She looked me up and down, skepticism written all over her face. "What's there to talk about? You think you can fool everyone, but not me." I took a deep breath, keeping my cool. "I'm really pregnant, Linda. There's a baby, our baby, Jake's and mine. Can't we put our differences aside, just for today, for the sake of the baby?" She scoffed, a harsh laugh escaping her. "You're unbelievable. Do you really think I'd fall for this charade?" Frustrated, but not wanting to cause a scene, I tried once more. "Linda, please. It's a celebration. Let's just enjoy the day." She snorted, turning away from me and heading upstairs to the second floor of our house. I hesitated, then followed her, not wanting her to spread more poison among the guests. Upstairs, I found her in the hallway, fuming. "Linda, why can't you just be happy for us? In a month, you'll see." There's a baby, a real baby. She whirled on me, her eyes cold. There is no baby. You're a con artist, Jenna. Always have been. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, tears pricking at the edges of my eyes. I don't know why you're doing this, but it's going to stop. Turning to leave, I started back down the stairs to the living room, eager to get away from her negativity. But as I took the first step, I felt a sharp shove from behind. My feet lost their grip, and I tumbled forward, the world turning upside down as I fell. The last thing I saw was the blur of the party decorations and the horrified faces of our guests before everything went dark. When I finally came to, the harsh glare of hospital lights and the steady beep of monitors greeted me. I was disoriented, my body aching all over. I turned my head and saw Jake, sitting next to me, his face pale and drawn with worry. He immediately leaned closer, taking my hand. Jenna, thank God you're awake. How do you feel? Where's the baby? I asked, panic rising in my chest before I could even gauge my own pain. Jake's eyes were filled with concern, and he squeezed my hand tighter. They had to, they induced labor to save him after your fall. He's on support, but he's fighting. Tears welled up in my eyes, and a sob choked me. Is he going to be okay? I managed to stammer between breaths. They're doing everything they can, Jake assured me, brushing a tear from my cheek. As I lay there, the memories of the fall flashed through my mind, the shock of being pushed, the terrifying tumble, Linda's face just before I turned to descend the stairs. Jake, I said, my voice firmer despite the fear. Linda pushed me. She did it. Jake's face contorted with confusion and distress. What? No, Jenna, it must have been an accident. It wasn't, I insisted, feeling a surge of frustration. Check the cameras. Please, just look. He nodded, standing up stiffly, his movements betraying his own fear and turmoil. After a few tense minutes, he returned, his face ghostly. I saw it, he said quietly. You were right. It's all there on the video. My mom pushed you. His next action was to call the police. I could only hear his side of the conversation, his words clipped, his tone a mix of anger and disbelief. When he hung up, he explained that they were taking his mother into custody. The next few days were a blur. Our son, tiny and fragile, fought for his life in his glass little bed, surrounded by beeping machines and bustling nurses. I prayed every moment I was awake, my heart living in that incubator with him. Linda was charged and brought to trial. Her defense was absurd. She claimed it was all a joke, that she'd wanted to prove I was lying about my pregnancy. I didn't mean any harm, she told the court. I just wanted everyone to see the truth. But the evidence was undeniable. The video didn't lie. The judge sentenced her to 2 years and ordered her to pay restitution. The sale of her house would cover the medical expenses and rehabilitation for our son. Months rolled into a year, and our little boy grew stronger every day. The rehabilitation was tough, endless appointments and therapies. But he was a fighter, and slowly, he caught up to his peers. By his second birthday, you couldn't tell he had such a rough start. Jake and I were a team through it all, our bond solidified through the trials we'd faced. As for Linda, her actions had severed any chance of reconciliation. I made it clear, and Jake agreed, that she was not to be part of our lives or our son's life. It was a harsh decision, but necessary for our family's well-being. And as I watched our son, healthy, happy, and vibrant, it felt like the entire universe had shifted, aligning just for us, in spite of everything. Linda's shadows no longer lingered, all that remained was the light of our little family, stronger and more radiant than ever. My name's Anna. I sell houses, the big fancy ones with views, and the small cozy types that feel like yesterday's bread, warm and welcoming. My office is way up in the sky, or so it feels on the 22nd floor. It's a world of glass that reflects everything, the clouds, the birds, and the infinite hustle of the city. So, here's where it all starts. There's this guy, Mike. Not just any guy. The type that walks into a room and even the air takes notice. He started working at the firm next door about a year ago. The first time we met was by the coffee machine. It's one of those fancy ones that can do everything except drink the coffee for you. I was fighting with the machine, trying to get it to give me something strong enough to keep my eyelids from staging a protest. "Need a hand?" That was Mike. Smiling, like he knew the secret joke behind every little malfunction. "Yeah, unless you know how to negotiate with a robot," I snapped back, more out of caffeine deprivation than any real annoyance. He laughed, that easy kind of laugh that's infectious. "Let me try. These things are more sensitive than my mom's chihuahua." He fiddled a bit, pushed some buttons like he was playing an arcade game, and voila, the machine surrendered 2 cups of the darkest brew. "Mike," he said, handing me one. "Anna." "Thanks," I replied, taking a sip. Heaven in a cup and just the jolt I needed. We started bumping into each other more. Coffee breaks turned into little chats about this and that. He was easy to talk to. He had a way of listening that made you want to tell him stuff you'd think was duller than watching paint dry. One day, we grabbed lunch together at a little cafe just a block away from our buildings. It was becoming a thing, us, talking about work, movies, the mess of the world. "You ever think about doing something else? Like, not selling houses?" he asked once, picking at his sandwich like it was a puzzle. "Nah," I shrugged. "It's in my blood. Plus, I get a kick out of making people's dreams come true." "What about you? Ever think of running away and joining the circus?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Can't. My mom would miss me too much." There it was. Mike was a mama's boy. Not in a living in her basement playing video games way, but close. He lived with her, took care of her. Hell, she even came to his office sometimes, like she was checking in on her investment. I thought it was sweet. A bit odd, maybe, but sweet. I liked that he cared so much. It was rare. Life at the office and with Mike was like rolling with a fast current, and before I knew it, a year had whisked by. The casual lunches and coffee breaks had woven into something a lot tighter, a lot more serious. One Friday, the office was buzzing more than usual. Word gets around when something's up, and around here, it spreads faster than a wildfire. I was plugging away at my desk when Liz, a coworker from 2 cubicles down, strutted over like she had some hot gossip. "Hey, Anna, everyone's saying he's gonna pop the question soon. You know, a ring, the whole shebang." She smirked, popping her gum. "Let him talk," I shrugged, trying to brush it off, but my heart was racing. Mike hadn't hinted anything, but the thought sent a zing through my spine. Later that day, as the sun dipped below the horizon painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple, Mike suggested we grab dinner instead of just a quick bite at the cafe. Something about the way he said it, all nervous-like, had my stomach doing somersaults. We ended up at this cozy little Italian place he knew, tucked away from the usual hustle of the city. It was the kind of spot you'd miss if you weren't looking for it, with dim lighting and candles flickering on the tables. The conversation flowed easy, but I could tell Mike was edgy. He fumbled with his napkin, cleared his throat more times than needed, and kept avoiding eye contact. "So, Anna," he finally started, his voice a bit shaky. "We've been doing this, us, for a while now, and I..." "Spit it out, Mike. You're killing me here," I cut in, half joking, half dying inside. He chuckled, that nervous sort of laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Then, he took a deep breath, reached into his pocket, and slid a small box across the table towards me. "I want to do this for real, Anna. Marry me?" The room spun a little. I mean, Liz's teasing, the office bets, suddenly, it was all real. But looking into Mike's hopeful eyes, I felt this solid, sure thing settle in my chest. "Yeah, Mike. Yes." I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. He grinned, relief washing over his face, and slipped the ring on my finger. It was simple, nothing too flashy, just like us. We spent the rest of the evening wrapped up in our little bubble, the chatter around us fading into a blur. The next week at work was like walking onto a stage. Heads turned, whispers followed me down the hall, and even the old-timers slapped Mike on the back and threw him knowing looks. And amid all the congratulations and cheeky comments, the bets came up again. Liz, with her big mouth, couldn't help herself. "Gotta say, Anna, didn't think you'd say yes. What's the over-under on this lasting then?" She laughed, nudging me. I rolled my eyes. "Place your bets, Liz. But we're in this for the long haul." "Hear that, folks? She's confident. Might want to reconsider your stakes," Liz announced to the room, which earned a round of laughter and more playful bets. But it was all noise. In that whirlwind of a moment, with a new ring on my finger and Mike by my side, the office could have fallen down around us, and I wouldn't have cared. We were doing this, and that's all that mattered. Our wedding was nothing fancy, just close friends and family in a small garden downtown. It was perfect, simple, intimate, and just about us. However, the real challenge started when we were supposed to set up our new life together. As we were packing up my apartment, Mike dropped the bomb. "Anna, I've been thinking. Mom and I have been living alone in this rented house since Dad passed. She won't feel good alone without me. What do you think about moving in with her? It could save us a ton on rent and bills." I sighed. It wasn't what I wanted, but how could I say no? He was right, his mom had been alone a lot. "Okay, let's give it a try," I conceded, trying to sound more upbeat than I felt. Moving day was a blur. His mom, Martha, welcomed us with open arms and an endless list of how things were done in her house. At first, it was fine. I thought, I can handle this. It's temporary. But as days turned into weeks, the true colors of living under Martha's roof began to show. She had rules for everything, from how laundry should be done to how the groceries should be stored. One evening, we were setting the table for dinner when she cornered me in the kitchen. "Anna, you need to start taking more responsibility around here. It's tradition for the daughter-in-law to handle the household," she stated firmly, her eyes pinning me in place. I was chopping vegetables, my hand stilling for a moment. "Martha, I work full-time, just like Mike. I'm happy to help, but we should split the chores equally." Mike walked in just then, and I looked to him for support. He was silent for a moment, then shrugged. "Mom's got a point, Anna. It's how she's always done things. Can't we just try it her way?" His words stung. I felt betrayed. How could he not see how unfair this was? 6 months in, the situation hadn't improved. If anything, it got worse. Martha started talking about moving to a bigger, more modern house. "Anna, you're in real estate. Start looking for something nice for us, a place where we can all live comfortably," she'd say, flipping through house listings. I tried to explain as gently as I could. "Martha, we really can't afford a new house right now. It's not just about finding a place, it's about being able to maintain it financially." She would wave off my concerns. "Nonsense. You'll find a good deal. You're good at your job, aren't you?" The pressure was mounting, and I felt trapped. I remembered the office bets about how long my marriage would last. It seemed everyone expected it to crumble. Determined not to give them that satisfaction, I gritted my teeth and bore it, hoping for a change. Just when I thought things couldn't get more chaotic, Mike's sister, Jen, showed up at our doorstep, tears streaming down her face, a toddler on her hip. The door barely swung open before she was halfway through it, her voice cracking with panic. "He kicked me out, Mike. He's done with me," said I cheated, which I didn't. She sobbed, collapsing into the hallway. Mike, ever the family man, wrapped an arm around her, guiding her to the living room. "It's okay, Jen. You can stay here as long as you need," he assured her. I stood there, mouth slightly open, trying to process another bombshell. As they settled down, I pulled Mike aside, my voice low. "Mike, this house is already packed. Maybe it's time we found our own place?" He shook his head, his brows knitting together. "Anna, come on, this is temporary. Just until Jen gets back on her feet. We can handle this." "Handle this?" It was like every day added another weight I wasn't sure I could carry. But I nodded, resigning myself to the new reality. The next weeks were a blur of chaos. Jen, bless her, was dealing with a lot, but that meant all her responsibilities fell to me. I'd come home from a long day at work to a house turned upside down by her 2-year-old whirlwind, Tommy. Toys everywhere, food splatters on the walls, you name it, Tommy did it. It felt like no matter what I did, it was never enough. The final straw came at dinner a few nights later. We were all sitting around the table, a tense silence hanging over us as we picked at our food. That's when Martha, with her usual flair for stirring the pot, dropped her next idea. You know, Anna, you're out working all day, and clearly, the house is suffering for it. My friend's daughter, Lisa, she's looking for a job as an au pair. Maybe you should hire her to help out, she suggested, like she was doing me a favor. Yeah? And who's paying for this au pair? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Martha smiled, a thin, knowing smile. Well, you are, of course. You're the one with the job. I glanced at Mike, hoping for some support, but he just focused on his plate, silent. Something inside me snapped. Fine, if hiring this girl meant less time at this madhouse, then so be it. All right, Martha. Have her come by tomorrow. We'll talk. I conceded, pushing my plate away, appetite gone. Lisa started the next day. She was a sweet girl, early 20s, and good with Tommy, which was a relief. She cooked, she cleaned, and the house seemed calmer. But it wasn't long before I noticed the giggles, the lingering look she shared with Mike when she thought I wasn't looking. One night, after I saw her touch his arm, laughing at something he said, I confronted him. Do you think it's appropriate, the way Lisa acts around you? I asked, my voice tight. Mike just chuckled, waving my concerns away like they were flies. Anna, you're being ridiculous. She's just a kid, and I've known her since she was in diapers. Don't be jealous. Jealous? Was I? Or was it just the final wear down of living in a house where I felt more like an outsider than a family member? I shook my head, trying to push away the nagging doubts. All right, Mike. If you say so, I replied, but the seed of unease had already been planted. Living in a crowded house with your in-laws is like walking on eggshells, you never know which step will crack. But worse than the thin ice was the creeping realization that things were amiss. At first, it was a 20 here, a 50 there. Small change, maybe misplaced. Then it was earrings, a bracelet my grandma gave me. That kind of stuff doesn't just walk away. One evening, after noticing my favorite watch was gone, I confronted Lisa, the au pair. Lisa, have you seen a silver watch around? It's missing. She gave me a wide-eyed innocent look. Oh no, Anna, I haven't seen anything. Maybe it's lost? Enough was enough. I installed hidden cameras in my room, a desperate move for desperate times. I wasn't going to accuse anyone without proof. But what I found blew the lid off any petty theft. It was a Wednesday, the kind of day where you just can't face going home. I sat in a cafe, laptop open, pretending to work, but really, I was watching the live feed from the camera. What I saw crushed me. Jen, Mike's sister, snuck into our room. She went straight for the drawer where I kept my jewelry, her movements too practiced. My heart sank. Then, the door opened again, it was Mike and Lisa. They weren't just chatting. No, they were, together. On our bed. It felt like a punch to the gut. I sat there, the taste of my coffee turning bitter. Anger boiled up, but a cold, calculating part of me pushed it down. No, I wasn't going to storm home. I needed a plan. Over the next few days, I collected every shred of evidence. Videos, times, everything. But revenge? That needed to be sweet, not hasty. One day, accidentally leaving my laptop open on a real estate listing was part of the play. It was a beautiful house, big yard, underpriced by half. Mike walked by, stopped, and stared at the screen. What's this? He asked, eyes lighting up. Oh, just some listing I found. Too bad we're not looking, huh? I murmured, feigning disinterest. He grabbed the laptop, scrolling through the photos. Are you kidding? This is perfect. Why wouldn't we look at this? Martha came over, peering over his shoulder. Oh, Mike. It's beautiful. Call them, now. Mike was practically bouncing as he dialed the number. Hi, yes, I'm calling about the listing. Yes, we want to put down a deposit. No need for a full check, we trust it's all good, he said, all but throwing our money at them. Who's it going to be registered to? I asked, my voice sweet as syrup. Me, obviously. And you'll help with the payments, right? He didn't even look at me as he spoke. Of course, I replied, my smile hiding daggers. Everything was falling into place. Sitting back, I watched as they celebrated, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Mike, Martha, and Jen, they all thought they had won. But the game had just changed, and I was now playing for keeps. The ink was barely dry on the documents for the new house when Mike decided to throw a dinner that felt more like a victory lap than a family gathering. The entire crew was there, his mom, Martha, his sister, Jen, and yes, Lisa, who'd become too familiar in all the wrong ways. The dining room buzzed with a kind of giddy tension as I walked in, the air thick with smug satisfaction. Mike was grinning like a kid who'd just gotten away with stealing cookies. All right, everyone, big news, Mike announced, standing at the head of the table with a glass of wine in hand. We're moving into the new house next week. Mom, Jen, and, of course, Lisa here will be coming with me. Anna and I, well, Anna won't be joining us. Martha clapped her hands, almost bouncing in her chair. Here are the divorce papers. I think Lisa suits my son better. You should leave here, right now. I took the envelope without a word, my hand steady as I pulled out the papers. I looked around the table, at their expectant faces, waiting for me to break, to make a scene. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I signed each page, each signature a silent seal on my exit from this twisted soap opera. I stood up, my chair scraping back loudly in the quiet that followed. Enjoy the house, I said, my tone even, a small smile playing on my lips. I walked out with my head held high, their laughter echoing behind me. They thought they'd won, but the game was far from over. A week after I'd moved out, living in a small but peaceful apartment, I got a call from Sarah, a friend who lived near the new dream home. Hey, you won't believe what's happening, Sarah's voice was a mix of concern and disbelief. Your ex and his circus moved into the house, and now there's a major stink, literally. The whole neighborhood is complaining. Oh? What's going on? I asked, a knowing smile creeping across my face. It's the sewage, Anna. Something's wrong with their pipes, sewage is leaking out onto the street. It's a disaster. They've had plumbers in all day. The news was a delicious twist I hadn't anticipated so soon. They're in deep, you know. Mike's trying to sort it, but he's out of his depth. No money to fix it properly. Sarah continued, her voice almost sympathetic. As I hung up, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. The perfect house, the perfect scam. The victory they thought they had was crumbling, just like the pipes in their precious new home. And as for me? I was finally free, breathing air that smelled a lot sweeter than the one surrounding them. After signing those divorce papers, it wasn't just a matter of packing up my old life, but gearing up for a battle. First thing, I met with a lawyer, Mr. Davidson, a no-nonsense guy with a reputation for being a bulldog in court. I laid out everything, hidden camera footage, dates, times, the works. Mr. Davidson, scanning through the evidence with keen eyes, finally looked up, his expression grim yet oddly satisfied. Anna, we have a solid case here. Infidelity, theft, you want to go to court, you'll likely seek compensation. That's exactly what I want, I told him, my voice steady, my resolve like steel. We filed for financial compensation for the betrayal and initiated a police complaint against Jen for theft. The days that followed were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and statements. Amidst this whirlwind, word got out about the divorce and everything else. I braced for whispers, for pity, or worse, mockery at work. But it never came. Instead, there was an unexpected wave of support. But not everyone was supportive. One afternoon, as I was walking out of a meeting, I saw her, Martha, storming into the office like it was her own house, fury radiating off her in waves. "Anna, you think you can just destroy my family and get away with it?" she screamed across the lobby. The office fell silent. Everyone's eyes were on us. I stood my ground. "Martha, you need to leave. Now." She took a step forward, her finger pointed accusingly. "I won't let you do this to us." Before she could continue, I gestured to the security guards. "Please escort her out. She's not welcome here." The guards were quick to react, taking Martha by the arms and leading her away as she continued to shout and struggle. It was a sad, desperate scene. The following week saw the legal battles unfold. Mike, faced with undeniable evidence, settled out of court, agreeing to a lump sum as compensation. His face, when he signed the papers, was a mix of anger and humiliation. Jen, caught red-handed on video, received a conditional sentence and was ordered to return all stolen items. Adding to their downfall, Mike became a joke at work. People would subtly lift their noses as he passed, snickering about the man from the stinky house. It wasn't long before he couldn't take it anymore and resigned. His departure made my daily life a lot easier. Not seeing him every day was a relief I hadn't expected. It had been 2 quiet, peaceful months since I had settled into my new life and small apartment in the city center. My days were filled with the normalcy of work, occasional lunches with colleagues, and evenings that I could now call my own. It felt like I was finally getting back to myself, the air around me lighter, my mornings brighter. But, like a shadow from the past, my phone rang one afternoon. The screen flashed Martha's name, dragging with it the weight of old, unpleasant memories. I hesitated but answered, curious despite myself. "Anna, you need to help us." Martha's voice came through, strained and desperate. It was so different from the last time we spoke, filled with accusations and anger. "What's wrong, Martha?" I asked, though a part of me already wanted to hang up. "It's this house. It's falling apart. The smell is unbearable, and we can't even use the bathrooms properly because of the sewage issues. Mike's drowning in debt because of the repairs," she explained, her voice cracking. I paused, taking in her words. The schadenfreude was tempting, but I pushed it aside. "Martha, Mike chose that house. He refused a proper inspection. What did you expect?" "But, Anna, we didn't know. His girlfriend left him, and Jen, she's gone too, ran off with some guy, leaving her son behind. We're struggling," she continued, pleading now. I sighed, the old anger and frustration stirring in my chest. "Martha, Mike made his decision without thinking of the consequences. You all supported him then. I'm sorry, but you're on your own." I hung up before she could say anything else, cutting off the last thread that connected me to that part of my life. As I set my phone down, a wave of emotions washed over me. Pity, relief, liberation, it was a mix that left me both saddened and strangely empowered. I had moved on, literally and metaphorically. My new apartment, though smaller, was mine alone. I decorated it to my taste, filled it with plants, and every corner of it was stamped with my presence, my independence. That evening, I stepped out onto my small balcony, overlooking the bustling city streets. The air was crisp, and the city lights flickered like distant stars. It was my city, my life. I had fought hard for this peace, and I intended to enjoy every bit of it. Never again, I whispered to myself, a promise hanging in the cool air. Never again will I let anyone control my life. I turned back inside, feeling the solid ground of my decisions beneath my feet. The apartment was quiet, a sanctuary from the world and its chaos. It was a fresh start, a new chapter that I was writing on my own terms. Our house was a palace, sure, but a cold and echoing one. Marble floors, fancy furniture that looked like it belonged on TV, not under my feet, that was my life. Dad, Richard the Great they called him at his construction company, built it all from scratch. He loved me to pieces, his only kid, but seeing him was like catching a glimpse of a shooting star, there and gone too fast. Gotta chase that next project, kiddo, he'd say with a wink, his booming voice the only warmth in the giant house. My mom, Isabella, well, she was the ice queen on a frozen throne. 18 years younger than Dad, she had cheekbones sharper than a diamond and a closet bigger than my entire room, overflowing with clothes that sparkled like disco balls. Her days were a whirlwind of fancy salons with French names I couldn't pronounce, massages that cost more than my bike, and gossip sessions with her friends who looked like they were all carved from the same mold. The only time Mom ever seemed to remember I existed was when she needed someone to boss around. Those jeans are a mess, honey. She'd sneer, her voice dripping with fake sugar. Haven't I taught you how to keep things tidy? Funny thing was, the house was spotless, thanks to a whole army of maids who scurried around like silent mice. But if I dared to sit down and watch cartoons after school, here she'd come, faster than a cheetah after lunch. Shouldn't you be learning something useful, Lily? She'd snap, her perfectly painted nails tapping a sharp rhythm on the counter. Like how to clean these floors properly before you ruin them? Useful? Cleaning floors? I looked at Dad, who was just coming through the door, grass stains on his jeans and a smile on his face. He'd been playing catch with the neighborhood kids again. Leave her alone, Isabella, he'd rumble, his voice warm and deep. She's got plenty of time for chores later. How about some ice cream sundaes, champ? My treat. Dad was my hero, my best friend. He'd wrestle with me on the floor, his booming laugh filling the house, a stark contrast to Mom's constant complaints. He taught me how to throw a perfect spiral, how to fix a leaky faucet, and most importantly, how to be kind, even when the world felt cold and empty, just like this giant house. The year I turned 15 was supposed to be different. Driver's ed, maybe a summer job at the ice cream shop down the street, all the normal teenage stuff. Instead, it became the year everything went sideways, faster than a roller coaster gone rogue. It started with a cough. A nagging, wet cough that wouldn't quit. Dad, who could usually shake off a cold in a day, just kept getting worse. His booming laugh faded into a raspy wheeze, his once strong hands grew thin and trembled slightly when he held mine. Doctors became a constant presence in our house. Stern-faced men and women who spoke in hushed tones that sent chills down my spine. A cruel diagnosis, laryngeal cancer. Dad, ever the optimist, kept a brave face. Just a little bug, he'd say, his voice weak but his eyes full of the same warmth I knew and loved. Nothing a few trips to the doc can't fix. Those trips turned into hospital stays, harsh treatments that left him drained and pale. The vibrant man who could build a skyscraper from the ground up was reduced to a frail shadow, his once booming voice barely a whisper. I spent every spare minute by his bedside, holding his hand, reading him stories, praying for a miracle. Don't worry, champ, he'd rasp, his eyes filled with concern. I'm gonna be alright. You're gonna be alright. Worry? I was drowning in it. The thought of a world without Dad's booming laugh, his rough but comforting hugs, was unbearable. Mom, however, remained a constant source of irritation. While Dad fought for his life, she continued her self-absorbed routine. Honestly, Richard, she'd complain, her voice clipped and cold. You're giving me a headache with all this coughing. Maybe you should just sleep in the guest room, it's keeping me awake. One thing I did notice, though, was a subtle shift in her appearance. Maybe it was just me, but her designer clothes seemed to fit a little tighter, her perfectly flat stomach developing a slight bulge. It was a bizarre contrast to Dad's worsening condition, a small, unsettling detail amidst the storm. Then came the day, a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. Mom was on her way out, a fresh manicure appointment awaiting her. Don't forget the black polish, darling. She called back from the doorway. Black always goes best with morning. Morning? What was she talking about? Before I could question it, the phone rang. Mom answered, her voice dripping with fake concern. A few moments later, she hung up, her face a mask. "Well," she sighed, a strange, almost satisfied glint in her eyes. "Looks like today needs to be a black manicure after all." My heart hammered in my chest. A cold dread wrapped its icy fingers around me. What do you mean?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Mom's mask slipped for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something cold and calculating crossing her face before it was replaced by a perfectly practiced frown. "Just some unfortunate news, Lily," she said, her voice back to its usual icy tone. "Looks like you'll be needing a strong woman to take care of you now." The days that followed were a blur of black crepe and forced smiles. The funeral home transformed our living room into a sterile, flower-filled showroom. Mom, ever the drama queen, reveled in the attention. "Black lace or sweetheart neckline?" she agonized, parading a seemingly endless stream of dresses in front of the mirror. Her friend, a woman with bleached blonde hair and a permanent pout, cooed in approval. "Oh darling, the sweetheart neckline. So Audrey Hepburn at her husband's funeral. Absolutely tragic and chic. Don't you think it's a little excessive?" I ventured, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom's eyes narrowed. "Excessive? Honey, this is for your father. We need to show his friends and family how much we respected him." Respected? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "By showing off your cleavage?" The air crackled with tension. Mom's perfectly painted smile faltered for a second, replaced by a flash of something cold and dangerous. "You watch your tone, young lady," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "These are adult matters you wouldn't understand." The adult matters turned out to be endless phone calls with florists and caterers, each conversation punctuated by Mom's theatrical sighs and demands for the absolute best. My grandparents, bless their hearts, tried to shield me from the worst of it, but the strained silences and worried glances spoke volumes. The funeral itself was a performance. Mom, draped in a ridiculously elaborate black dress that clung to her curse like a second skin, played the grieving widow to the hilt. Tears streamed down her perfectly made-up face as she clung to the arms of various concerned-looking relatives. Later that night, as I scrolled through social media in a daze, a familiar face popped up on my feed. There she was, Mom, in all her tragic and chic glory, the funeral photo plastered across her Instagram page. The caption, dripping with saccharine sentiment, spoke of her undying love and devotion to my father. "The love of my life, gone too soon," it read. A week had crawled by since Dad's funeral, each day a heavy weight on my chest. Mom, however, seemed to thrive in the silence. The endless parade of black dresses was replaced by a return to her usual flamboyant wardrobe, her smile a little too bright, her eyes a little too cold. One evening, as I trudged up the stairs after another day of forced pleasantries at school, the sound of unfamiliar laughter filtered through the air. I froze, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The living room door was ajar, light spilling out into the hallway. Taking a deep breath, I peeked inside. There, sprawled on our plush sofa, was a young man who looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a fitness magazine. He was all tan skin, perfect teeth, and designer stubble. Mom, perched beside him like a preening peacock, was batting her eyelashes with a practiced innocence I hadn't seen since I was a toddler. "Lily," she purred, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "This is Michael, my fiancé." "Fiancé?" I repeated, my voice barely a croak. Mom's smile faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before it was replaced by a too bright cheer. "Yes, darling. Isn't that wonderful? Michael is going to be living with us now." Michael, who hadn't even acknowledged my existence until now, finally grunted a greeting. Before I could process this latest absurdity, Mom continued, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. "And guess what else, honey bunch? We're expecting." Expecting? My mind reeled. Not only did she have a new husband-to-be a week after Dad's funeral, but she was also pregnant? It was all too much to take in. "What about Dad?" I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "Isn't this a little A little what? Mom snapped, her mask of cheer slipping for a moment. A little inconvenient? Don't be ridiculous. Life goes on, darling. And besides, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Michael here makes me truly happy. Something your father, bless his soul, was never quite capable of. Fury, hot and raw, bubbled up inside me. You never loved him, did you? I spat, my voice shaking with rage. You cheated on him. Mom's eyes narrowed. The smile was completely gone now, replaced by a steely glint. Perhaps, she admitted with a cold laugh. But that's none of your concern, is it? Now, from now on, you'll do as Michael and I say. You'll help with the housework, of course, and then you'll be a wonderful nanny to your new sibling. Over my dead body, I choked out, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. Don't get sassy with me, young lady, Mom hissed, her voice low and dangerous. This is my house, and you'll do what I tell you, or you'll get out. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I straightened my spine, a newfound resolve hardening my voice. I wouldn't stay under the same roof with you for another minute even if you begged me, I declared, my gaze unwavering. You may have gotten rid of Dad, but you won't control me. Mom's face contorted in fury. Get out then, she shrieked, lunging towards me. She grabbed me by the shoulders and pushed me out the door. And don't come crawling back when you have nowhere else to go, she bellowed after me. I didn't answer. The front door slammed shut behind me with a satisfying thud. Snow swirled around the streetlights, casting an eerie glow on the deserted sidewalk. I was in my school clothes and sneakers, completely unprepared for the winter chill. But the sting of the cold was nothing compared to the burning betrayal in my heart. Looking down at my flimsy clothes, I spotted the abandoned garage across the street. Dad used to keep his old tools and some winter gear there. Maybe, just maybe, there was something I could use to keep warm for the short walk. The garage was a treasure trove of forgotten memories. In the back corner, under a dusty tarp, I spotted a familiar shape, Dad's old hunting jacket. It was worn and faded, but the thick leather promised some protection from the biting wind. With shaking hands, I dialed a taxi, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. The wait seemed to stretch on forever, each passing minute a small eternity. Finally, the headlights pierced the darkness, a beacon of hope in the cold night. My grandparents' porch light cast a warm glow as I stepped out of the taxi. Tears welled up in my eyes again, this time a mix of relief and sorrow. My grandma opened the door before I could even knock, her face etched with worry. Lily? What on earth? Her voice trailed off as she took in my appearance. Honey, you're freezing. Come in, come in. She ushered me inside, wrapping a thick blanket around my shoulders. Grandpa was right behind her, his face grim as he took in my tear-streaked cheeks and the oversized jacket. What happened, sweetheart? He asked, his voice gruff but full of concern. I took a shaky breath, the warmth of the house slowly seeping into my bones. Then, in a torrent of words, I poured out everything, Mom's cold behavior after Dad's death, the fiancé, the pregnancy, and finally, the cruel revelation. My voice cracked as I spoke, the raw pain and betrayal spilling out into the room. By the time I finished, I was sobbing uncontrollably, my body racked with hurt. Grandma held me tight, her silence a comforting presence. Grandpa, after a moment, cleared his throat. There's something you should know, Lily, he began, his voice low and serious. Before your father passed away. He paused, his gaze flickering to Grandma before continuing. He knew all about her cheating and pregnancy, and well. He hesitated, then met my eyes. He had a lawyer come in and change his will. My heart skipped a beat. Change his will? Yes, Grandma chimed in, taking my hand. You see, honey, your father loved you more than anything in the world. It means that you are the sole heir to your father's estate. My jaw dropped. Everything? Everything, Grandma confirmed with a sad smile. But because of your age, you can't fully access the money until you graduate from college. Until then, a legal guardian needs to manage it. Not Mom, I blurted out before he could finish. The thought of her controlling Dad's money meant for me, was unbearable. Grandpa and Grandma exchanged a knowing look. Of course not, Grandma said, her voice firm. That's why we need to talk about custody. But to take you away from your mother, we need proof of her unsuitability. Proof? I reached for my phone, a mischievous glint entering my eyes. I have plenty of that. Over the past year, in a misguided attempt to protect myself, I'd started recording some of my arguments with Mom. The last conversation, the one where she kicked me out, was there in all its ugly glory. With trembling fingers, I played it back for my grandparents. The sound of my mother's cruel words filled the room, each sentence a fresh blow. By the time the recording ended, a tense silence hung heavy in the air. Then Grandpa cleared his throat. This is more than enough, Lily. We'll get you a lawyer first thing tomorrow. You won't be going back to that house. Relief washed over me, warm and welcome. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about safety, about being in a place where I was loved and valued. A week had crawled by since the blow-up with Mom. One sunny and cold afternoon, as I was helping Grandma cook a pie, a loud, insistent pounding shattered the quiet. I froze, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Grandma straightened up, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. That sounds like trouble, she muttered, brushing her hands off the flour. Before we could even exchange another word, the front door swung open with a bang, revealing a sight that made my blood run cold. Mom stood there, her face flushed with anger and desperation. Her hair was a mess, her clothes looked like they'd been slept in, and her eyes held a manic glint that sent shivers down my spine. There you are, she shrieked, her voice laced with a barely contained fury. You little ingrate. How could you do this to me? Grandma stepped forward, her voice firm but unwavering. Lily doesn't have to do anything, dear. She's here of her own free will. Mom scoffed, her gaze darting around the room before landing on me. Free will? Don't be ridiculous. You've filled her head with lies about me. Lies? I echoed, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. You're the one who lied, Mom. You lied to Dad, you lied to me, and now you have the nerve to play the victim? You never loved me and Dad. Mom's face contorted in fury. Don't you dare talk about your father like that. And love? You think that dusty old man was capable of love? He was boring, Lily. A drag. I deserved more. Her words hung heavy in the air, a cruel and selfish justification for her actions. My fists clenched at my sides, the anger bubbling inside me threatening to boil over. So you married him for money, then cheated on him while he was still alive? I spat, my voice dripping with disgust. And now you're angry because you're not going to get your claws into his inheritance? Mom's face turned ashen, her bravado crumbling under the weight of my words. Look, she said, her voice cracking with desperation. I know I messed up. But can't we just forget all that? I found out about the new will, Lily. You have everything now. You can help me, can't you? I'm pregnant, for crying out loud. I have nowhere to go. Her words hung heavy in the air, a desperate plea for a lifeline. A part of me, a tiny, insignificant part, flickered with a misplaced sense of pity. But then I remembered the countless nights I'd spent alone. Those were your choices, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. And now you have to face the consequences. 2 months flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers, court dates, social worker visits, it felt like my life had become a legal drama. Mom, unsurprisingly, contested the custody hearing tooth and nail. The courtroom was a tense battleground. Mom, dressed in a cheap-looking suit and overly dramatic makeup, sat across from me, a picture of fake concern. Your Honor, she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. I am Lily's mother. I love her dearly, and I'm her only living parent. Taking her away from me would be a travesty. Her words were like nails on a chalkboard, a stark contrast to the cruel reality I knew. My lawyer, a sharp woman with a steely gaze, wasted no time in presenting her case. The recordings I'd made played on a small speaker in the courtroom, each snipped conversation a damning indictment of Mom's character. Her voice, dripping with contempt and frustration, filled the room, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Then came the final blow, the recording of the night she kicked me out. The raw fear and confusion in my voice, the chilling indifference in hers, painted a picture 1,000 words couldn't express. As the last recording ended, a heavy silence descended upon the courtroom. Even the judge, a stern but fair-looking woman, seemed taken aback. Looking directly at Mom, I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice surprisingly steady. "Your Honor," I said. "Does this sound like the voice of a loving mother? Does this sound like someone who deserves to raise a child?" Mom opened her mouth to retort, but the judge held up a hand, silencing her. "The evidence presented is compelling," she said, her voice firm. "The recordings paint a clear picture of a dysfunctional and emotionally abusive relationship. Mrs. Miller," she addressed my mother directly, "your behavior towards your daughter has been documented and deemed unacceptable. Therefore, this court grants full custody of Lily to her grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson." A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it felt like I could breathe again for the first time in months. Grandma reached out and squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Grandpa, ever stoic, offered me a gruff but genuine smile. A few days later, we stood outside the house I'd once called home. The eviction notice, a cold formality, felt like a badge of honor. Mom and her now fuming boyfriend were huddled by the door, their faces a mixture of anger and desperation. "Lily, honey, please," Mom whined, her voice laced with desperation. "Can't we just talk about this? I know I messed up, but I'm your mother. And I'm pregnant. We have nowhere to go." She gestured dramatically to her noticeably swollen belly, a desperate attempt to tug at my heartstrings. But this time, it didn't work. "You had your chance, Mom," I said, my voice firm. "You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences. Besides," I added, "you have Dad's savings, enough for a decent apartment and a comfortable life for you and your new family." The mention of the money hit a nerve. Mom's face contorted in fury, but this time, it was laced with a hint of fear. "You wouldn't dare cut me off," she hissed, her voice brittle. "I don't have to," I replied coolly. "You'll have access to a monthly stipend, enough to cover your basic needs. But that's all. Consider it my charity." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but the look in my eyes must have stopped her. With a final glare in my direction, she stormed off, her boyfriend trailing behind like a kicked puppy. 5 years had melted away like summer snow. Graduation from high school was a bittersweet affair, a celebration of achievement tinged with the pang of leaving a familiar chapter behind. Now, with a brimming acceptance letter in hand, I stood on the precipice of a new adventure, college. The University of Economics loomed ahead, a bustling hive of knowledge and ambition. Grandma fussed over my dorm room, insisting on rearranging the furniture for maximum efficiency. Grandpa, ever the pragmatist, helped me set up my laptop and internet connection, muttering about the outrageous cost of higher education. "Don't worry, Grandpa," I said, giving him a hug. "I'll make the most of it. This is Dad's company I'll be running someday, remember?" He squeezed me back, his gruff voice softening. "That's my girl. Your father would be proud." The mention of Dad always brought a lump to my throat. These past years had been a constant dance between grief and gratitude. Grief for the father I barely had the chance to know, and gratitude for the loving grandparents who had stepped up when I needed them most. College life was a whirlwind of lectures, study groups, and caffeine-fueled all-nighters. It wasn't easy, but I threw myself into it with a fervor that surprised even myself. News about Mom trickled in occasionally, delivered in hushed tones by well-meaning family friends. Apparently, she'd given birth to a stillborn child, a tragedy that had only deepened the chasm between her and the world. Her boyfriend, the one who'd abandoned ship when the comfortable life in a luxurious house evaporated, was nowhere to be seen. Honestly, none of it fazed me. The woman who had born me was a stranger, a ghost from a past life. I had no room for negativity in my life, not when I was busy building a future where hard work and determination were the cornerstones of success. My name is Anna, and for the longest time, my life was all about chemistry and work. After high school, I threw myself into university, studying to become a chemical engineer. Then it was straight to the lab, developing new polymer compounds. My personal life? Didn't even make the to-do list. It was work, more work, and, well, you get it. Then, one unexpected night, everything shifted. I didn't even want to go to that party. It was one of those "you have to come, Anna" situations where my friend Jenna practically dragged me out the door. "It'll be fun," she said. I doubted that, but I went. At the party, Jenna was in her element, chatting up everyone. Then she grabs this guy by the arm and pulls him over to where I was nursing my drink in silence. "Anna, meet Tom," she said, a little too enthusiastically for my liking. "Tom, this is the genius chemist friend I was telling you about." Tom looked a bit taken aback, his eyes wide as he took me in. "Hi," he said, his voice uncertain. "Jenna's told me quite a lot about you." "Good things, I hope," I replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "Yeah, very impressive," he managed, though it sounded like he was talking about a scary movie, not a person. We somehow stumbled through the initial awkwardness and found a quiet corner. Turns out, Tom worked as a manager at a trading company and was a lot more down to earth than our rocky start suggested. He confessed later that night that he'd been intimidated at first, thinking I was too smart for someone like him. That made me laugh. It was refreshing, really. We started seeing each other, and a year flew by. I was surprised at how serious we'd gotten, considering how I used to dodge anything personal, like a chemical spill. Then came the day I met his family. His mom was a sweetheart, welcoming me with open arms. But his sister, Laura? A different story. Right from the start, she looked at me like I was a problem she hadn't figured out how to solve yet. During dinner, I tried to make conversation, asking her about her interests. She just smirked and said, "So, you're the chemist? You cook up stuff in the lab, and now you're here to cook my brother's brain?" I was taken aback, but managed a weak smile. I prefer to think I enlighten minds rather than cook them. Ethan, trying to cut the tension, jumped in. "Laura's always been protective of me," he explained. "She's not easy to win over, but don't take it personally." As if on cue, Laura leaned over and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "No one's good enough for my brother, remember that." Despite Laura's cold reception, Ethan and I got engaged and planned a modest wedding. On our wedding day, Laura's attitude was even more brazen. She rolled her eyes during our vows, snickered during the speeches, and complained loudly about the food and decorations. A couple of months had passed since Ethan and I said our vows. Just as we were settling into our new life, his mother, Mrs. Johnson, took a bad turn. Her illness baffled the doctors, no one could pinpoint what was wrong. She was confined to her bed, her body partially paralyzed, plagued by severe headaches and kidney pain. Ethan suggested that I move into their family home to help care for her, and given my fond relationship with his mother, I agreed without hesitation. From day one, the reality of our situation hit hard. Mrs. Johnson was in a bad way, rarely leaving her bed, and I took on much of the caregiving alongside Ethan. I bathed her, helped her change, and gently combed her hair, which, distressingly, came out in clumps more often than not. One evening, while Ethan was downstairs sorting through some bills, I broached a delicate subject with him in the kitchen. "Ethan, your mom's condition is worsening. Don't you think a nursing home with professional care might be better for her?" I suggested, hoping he'd see the sense in it. Ethan rubbed his forehead, the weight of the world seeming to press down on him. "I know, Anna, I know it's bad. But Laura, she's adamant about keeping Mom here. She says a nursing home would just make things worse." I sighed, my hands clenching in frustration. "But isn't it worse for her to suffer here without proper medical care?" Before Ethan could reply, Laura walked into the kitchen. Her presence was always like a storm brewing. "I heard that, Anna. You think you know better than us? My mother stays where she is," she snapped, her eyes flashing angrily. Realizing this wasn't a battle I could win today, I backed down. "Okay, Laura. I didn't mean to upset you. I just hate seeing her like this." After Laura left, Ethan whispered a tired apology. "I'm sorry. Laura's been through a lot. You know, with her husband passing and everything. She's not herself." "Yeah, I get it," I replied, though I felt a bitter edge to my words. "But it's not just about what she wants. It's about what's right for your mom." Ethan nodded, looking equally torn. "I know. Let's just give it some more time. Maybe she'll come around." Time passed slowly after that conversation. Days turned into weeks. I spent hours by Mrs. Johnson's side, watching her struggle with every passing day. Her room became a world unto itself, filled with the sounds of her labored breathing and the soft hum of the medical equipment that seemed to multiply with each week. Laura's resistance, Ethan's indecision, and the daily sight of Mrs. Johnson's suffering weighed heavily on my heart. Moving in here, I had hoped to make things better, to be a part of the family in every way that counted. But as each day passed, I felt more like an outsider fighting an unwinnable battle, clinging to the hope that somehow, someway, I could make a difference in this house that had become my home. Living with Ethan's family was proving to be more of a challenge than I'd ever expected. My relationship with Laura was especially tense. She always found something to criticize about me, and it didn't help that Ethan rarely stood up for me in these conflicts. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen trying to prepare a meal that Mrs. Johnson could easily swallow. Ethan was at work, and I was alone, which was becoming more and more my preference given Laura's frequent, harsh visits. As I was mashing potatoes, the back door slammed. I didn't need to turn around to know Laura had entered. "Making a mess as usual, I see," Laura's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. I kept my focus on the task at hand, my grip tightening on the masher. "I'm making dinner for your mom. She needs something easy to eat." Laura scoffed, leaning against the counter and watching me like a hawk. "You think you're some kind of saint, don't you? Always hovering, always playing the devoted daughter-in-law. Makes me sick." I placed the bowl down with a little more force than necessary. "I'm not trying to be a saint, Laura. I'm trying to help." "Oh, cut the crap, Anna. We both know you're just waiting for her to kick the bucket. Playing the grieving widow ahead of time, are we?" Laura snapped, her eyes gleaming with something spiteful. It was another regular Sunday dinner when the tension hit a new high. Laura had just breezed into the dining room, fashionably late as usual, wearing a bright red dress. As we sat down to eat, Laura started right in, like she was waiting just for that moment. "Really, Anna, must you always work so late? It's like you don't care about being a part of this family at all." I kept my eyes on my plate, trying to stay calm. "I do my best, Laura. My work demands a lot. Unlike you, who doesn't even know what it's like to work." Ethan, who had been silent up until then, finally spoke, though not in my defense. "Anna, please remember Laura is going through a lot right now with her husband's recent passing. Try to be a little more understanding." His words felt like a betrayal. I shot back before I could stop myself. Maybe if she dressed more like a widow rather than going to a party, I could take her grief a bit more seriously. The table went silent. Ethan's expression hardened. "Anna, that's uncalled for." "But it's true." I couldn't hold back. "She criticizes everything I do, but barely looks in on her own mother. How is that fair?" Laura slammed her fork down, standing abruptly. "How dare you judge my grieving process? You have no idea what I'm going through." Ethan rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. "Anna, can we talk about this later? Please, let's just finish dinner." I nodded, tight-lipped, and we ate the rest of the meal in uncomfortable silence. After dinner, I tried to clear the air with Ethan, but it was clear his patience was wearing thin. Anna, I know it's hard, but you have to try harder with Laura. She's my sister. She's family. And what am I? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You're my wife, and I love you, but Laura's been in my life a lot longer. You two need to sort this out. I felt alone, truly alone, even though Ethan was right there. It seemed like no matter what I did, it would never be enough for Laura, or, it seemed, for Ethan. 2 months had passed in a blur of daily routines and silent meals until the day we lost Mrs. Johnson. Her death was both a shock and a sorrow that gripped the household, pulling us all into a deep, somber state. Ethan was devastated, his grief palpable and heavy. At the funeral, under a dreary, cloud-filled sky, the tension that had been simmering between me and Laura finally boiled over. As people quietly murmured their condolences, Laura cornered me by the old oak near her mother's grave. "This is your fault, you know," Laura hissed, her eyes sharp and accusing. "If you had cared for her properly, she'd still be here." I felt a flash of anger, but I kept my voice steady. "Laura, I did everything I could. She needed professional care, more than what we could give at home." "Excuses, just excuses," Laura snapped back, her voice low but fierce. "You just didn't want the burden, did you?" I tried to keep calm, but her words stung. "That's not true, and you know it. I cared for your mother every day." Laura scoffed, shaking her head before storming off. The days that followed were filled with quiet mourning. I tried to give Ethan the space to grieve, but the house felt colder, emptier. While tidying up Mrs. Johnson's room one afternoon, I stumbled upon some old medical documents tucked away in her desk. Curiosity got the better of me, and I began to read through them. According to the files, Mrs. Johnson had been in excellent health just a year ago, but her condition had deteriorated rapidly, leading to the failure of several organs all at once. Later that evening, I brought it up with Ethan. "It's odd, isn't it? Her health declined so suddenly. And it says here multiple organ failure was the cause." Ethan, still looking tired and worn from the days of grieving, nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's strange. The same thing happened to Laura's husband. He also had multiple organ failures." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered something from my chemistry classes. "Ethan, both your mom and Laura's husband had severe hair loss before they passed, right?" He looked up, puzzled by the direction of my question. "Yes, that's right. Why?" I hesitated, the implications swirling in my head. "It's just, severe hair loss can sometimes be a sign of thallium poisoning." "It's a stretch, but..." Ethan cut me off, his voice a mix of disbelief and irritation. "Let's not go down that road. It's been tough enough without adding wild theories into the mix." I nodded, agreeing outwardly, while inwardly I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling the coincidence gave me. But I knew better than to push it further. Ethan was already on edge, and my accusations, or even suspicions, could drive a wedge too deep to remove. It started like any other morning, except for the moment I ran my hands through my hair and felt a clump come away with my fingers. Staring at the strands in horror, my mind raced. I knew something was terribly wrong. Frantically, I headed to the lab at work, my heart pounding as I ran tests on myself, a procedure I was all too familiar with but never thought I'd use in such a personal emergency. The results were as chilling as my suspicions, traces of thallium in my bloodstream. Rushing home, I confronted Ethan, my voice trembling with fear and urgency. "Ethan, I found thallium in my blood. Someone is trying to poison me." Ethan stared at me, his expression morphing from confusion to disbelief. "You're being paranoid, Anna. You're seeing conspiracies where there aren't any." Before I could argue, Laura walked into the room, having overheard our conversation. "Oh, please. You work in a lab, Anna. For all we know, you could have brought that poison home yourself. Maybe you poisoned Mom," she snapped, her voice dripping with accusation. I was aghast, the room spinning around me as her words sank in. Ethan's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. "I can't do this anymore, Anna. You're too dangerous to be around. I want a divorce." My world crumbled in an instant. Laura smirked triumphantly. You heard him. Get out of our house. Numb and heartbroken, I packed my belongings, the weight of their betrayal crushing me. Sitting amidst the unpacked boxes, the truth slowly pieced itself together in my mind. It was Laura. She had poisoned her mother and tried to poison me. Determined to find proof, I hired a private detective and handed over all the evidence I had, including the medical reports and my blood test results. 2 weeks dragged by with agonizing slowness until the detective came back with shocking news. Laura had burned through the fortune she inherited from her late husband and was drowning in debt. It became clear her motives were as toxic as the poison she favored. This isn't just about inheritance, I told the detective, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She's eliminating anyone who stands in her way. She could be targeting Ethan next. Armed with this new information, I knew I had to act fast to prevent further harm. I called Ethan, my voice trembling but firm. Ethan, I have proof about Laura. We need to meet. You have to see this. His response was cold, dismissive. You're crazy, Anna. I can't believe I ever trusted you. And with that, he blocked my number, cutting off any chance of further communication. Standing there, phone in hand, I felt a mix of rage and resolve wash over me. Despite everything that had happened, I knew I needed to confront Ethan and reveal Laura's malicious plans. Reluctantly, he let me into the house. The coolness inside was a stark contrast to the sweltering heat outside. Ethan was quiet, his face drawn and tired. There was a glass of lemonade on the table, condensation beating on the outside. It's hot out there, he said, nodding towards the glass. Here, have some lemonade. Thirsty and distracted by the tension, I took a few sips. Almost immediately, my stomach churned painfully, a sharp stab that doubled me over. Ethan, I gasped, clutching my abdomen. Where did this lemonade come from? It's just lemonade. Laura made it. What's wrong? His brow furrowed, a mix of concern and confusion crossing his face. The lemonade, it's poisoned, I managed to say between sharp breaths. Laura's trying to kill us for the inheritance. Ethan's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. You're out of your mind, Anna. I'm tired of these crazy theories about Laura trying to kill someone. I was desperate, the pain overwhelming. Please, Ethan, you have to believe me. Call 911. As I spoke, my vision began to blur, and I felt myself slipping towards the floor. The cold tiles were a harsh welcome as I hit them, semi-conscious, barely aware of my surroundings. Just then, Laura walked in, catching the tail end of our conversation. She looked from Ethan to me, lying helpless on the floor, and a smirk twisted her lips. Really, Ethan, she's losing it. Making up stories even now, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Ethan, conflicted and overwhelmed, rushed to the kitchen to fetch a cold compress, leaving me at Laura's mercy. Kneeling beside me, Laura leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper. This is the end for you. In a few hours, the thallium will finish its work, and then Ethan's next. Once he's gone, everything will be mine. Her words were the last thing I heard before darkness enveloped me, pulling me into a deep, silent void. I awoke in the sterile brightness of a hospital room, the beeping of machines by my bedside punctuating the quiet. My mind felt foggy, memories of the last few days tangled like a ball of knotted yarn. The sharp pain in my stomach had subsided, replaced by a dull ache that seemed to echo deeper, reaching beyond the physical. The nurse, seeing me stir, came over with a reassuring smile. You're in the hospital, she explained. You've been out for days, but you're safe now. Did anyone come with me? My husband, Ethan? My voice was hoarse, the words scratching their way out. She checked her notes, her expression neutral. No, you were brought in by an ambulance alone. But your husband did call 911, even though there was some resistance, apparently. A doctor came in next, flipping through my chart with clinical detachment. You're lucky to be alive. We managed to remove the thallium from your system in time. A few more hours and... He didn't finish his sentence, but he didn't need to. As the reality of the situation settled in, I felt a mixture of relief and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. I was saved, yes, but at what cost? Ethan's absence spoke volumes, and the hurt from it gnawed at me. Later, 2 police officers walked into the room. Their faces were stern, their notebooks ready. "We understand you took matters into your own hands when you suspected poisoning. That was risky. You should have come to us as soon as you suspected something." Shame washed over me. He was right. I had been so caught up in proving Laura's guilt, I hadn't considered the dangers of facing her alone. "I know," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I needed proof. I thought I could handle it." The other officer softened slightly. "Well, your actions did lead to uncovering the truth. We've apprehended your sister-in-law. It turns out she did poison her husband and your mother-in-law with thallium. We exhumed their bodies and confirmed it. She's facing multiple charges now." Their words were a cold comfort. Justice might have been served, but the cost was etched deeply into my heart. The officers thanked me before leaving, their steps echoing down the hall long after they were out of sight. Recovery was slow, and with it came the realization that the next steps were mine alone to take. Ethan's absence had severed whatever ties remained, and as painful as it was clear that my path forward would not include him. The trial of my sister-in-law, Laura, dragged on for months. It was a grueling process, filled with legal complexities and emotional turmoil. Throughout it all, the courthouse was a cold place, echoing with the footsteps of those seeking justice and those dreading it. I hadn't seen Ethan since I left the hospital, not until the first day of the trial. He sat there, a stoic figure, clinging to a version of his sister that no longer existed in the eyes of the law. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented by the prosecution, Ethan refused to believe Laura's guilt. He whispered fiercely during recess, "You're wrong about her. The tests, the accusations, they're all mistakes. Laura's an angel, not a monster." I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I once loved, but found only a stranger. "How can you still say that after everything? Look at the evidence." He shook his head, dismissive and cold. "It's all circumstantial. You just want revenge on her, that's all this is." The trial continued, witnesses came and went, experts testified about the lethal levels of thallium found in the bodies, and slowly, the truth began to unfold before everyone in that courtroom. Laura sat there, mostly impassive, until the pressure of the undeniable evidence reached a breaking point. On the final day, when confronted with a particularly damning piece of evidence, Laura's composure cracked. With a cruel smile, she confessed, her voice chilling the room. "Yes, I did it. I poisoned them all, my husband, my mother, and I tried to kill Anna and Ethan too. All for the property, all for a life I deserved." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the shock palpable in the air. Ethan's face drained of color as he turned to look at me, the realization of his sister's true nature finally dawning on him. Laura was found guilty of double premeditated murder and attempted murder. The judge handed down a life sentence, ensuring she would spend her remaining days behind bars. Additionally, all her assets were seized and awarded to me as compensation for the immense physical and emotional harm she had caused. After the verdict, Ethan approached me outside the courtroom. His eyes were red, his voice shaky. "Anna, I'm so sorry. I was blind. Please, can we start over? Can we try again?" The pain of his betrayal, once sharp and biting, had settled into a dull, constant ache. I looked at him, really looked at him, and knew that too much had passed between us, too much had been broken. "No, Ethan. I can't. It's over." He reached out, but I stepped back, my decision firm. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." Leaving the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, not because I enjoyed the outcome, but because it was finally over. The battle was done, and justice, though it came at a steep price, was served. My recovery was slow, a process of rebuilding what Laura had tried to destroy. Physically, the poison had left its mark, and emotionally, the scars ran even deeper. I underwent treatment, attended therapy, and slowly pieced my life back together in a new apartment, far from the house that once promised a shared future with Ethan. Now, living alone, I work on forgetting, on healing. Some days are harder than others, the memories of betrayal and poison haunting me like ghosts of a past life. But each morning, I wake up and remind myself that I survived, that I am free from the web of deceit that once threatened to claim my life.